Welcome back
All right,
to.
Aki.
Oh, oh, there you are. Yeah, we just went live.
You did start without
Yeah,
me. I
yeah,
thought
yeah.
like
Well,
as I was getting up, I was like, oh, I was like, I thought you were
well,
saying no.
no. Hold on. I hit go live. It has like a 30-second intro thing, but you know whatever. Welcome back to the Nautical Chronicle. I'm your host, Eo Clausington, and we're back from. Shoot, who did I talk to last week? Um, oh right, I covered the shoot. What did I do last week? I covered the oh yeah, that was the this a rehash stream on the Old Glory Club East Coast Forum. I hosted several of the organizers and George Bagby, who was one of the speakers. Um, Next week, I'm hosting Aaron McIntyre here for a quick review of his book, The Total State. But right now, I have the one, the only, the eccentric Southerner extraordinaire, Christopher Sandbatch. How are you doing, Sandbatch?
Doing pretty great. Doing pretty great. It's funny because like I'm like really a couple of years out from like talking about Southern stuff in a really meaningful way. But I have been today, like right before we got on, I was talking about the Southern
Mhm.
style, whatever the Southern style is. And I mean, we were talking about this beforehand, but like when people always ask me, like, what the hell is it that you do? And why are you such a person?
Mhm.
And when you're looking, because I'm always all over the place. I do AI stuff. I write poetry. I write for magazines. I'm traveling all over the country. I'm kind of one of those just an itinerant scholar in a lot of ways. And when
Mhm.
you're looking for in the like sort of great tapestry of what it is, sort of like my expertise,
Mhm.
if you were to find the golden filament at the center of the balancing point of the entire Sandbatch operation, it's this man John C. Calhoun. He's the only he's the only politician in world history who I will formally affiliate myself with with the suffix "ite." I am a Calhounite. I have no objectivity here. He is, to me, an incredible hero, and I think he's the most underappreciated person in American history.
Well, that's an incredibly, I guess, controversial statement considering I guess, his overall legacy and in the current sort of in the contemporary light, his legacy isn't particularly uh, shining. Let's just say.
No,
Um,
but I think I asked you before we started, why did you want to talk about this? And I guess you were reading Profiles in Courage.
okay, so I picked up sort of on a lark. I ended up picking up Liberty and or Union and Liberty. Um, it's essentially a compilation um, of the political speeches of John C. Calhoun, and I'll just pull it up right now just so people can see what I was reading. Um,
Yeah, I want to see which
and
edition.
yeah, so this is actually the exact edition. Um, it's I've wanted to get into the Great Triumvirate for ages, and there's a great book called the Great Triumvirate. But before I get into a good general history of the three, the three titans of early American republics, political. How do you say? Um, the three power brokers of the early republic.
Gods flashing like thunder in the night sky. I mean, it's difficult. It's very difficult for us to contextualize the power that these three men exerted for, nearly half a century,
Yeah, and to sort of exemplify exactly what we're sort of trying to get at here. Right. No, this is the wrong page. Um, I wanted to read a good book on the Great Triumvirate, but I wanted to, I guess, start by actually reading, what the guys actually wrote. And why would I have an interest in the Great Triumvirate? Well, you know, way back in the JFK administration, there was a committee in Congress that, their job was to find, hey, who are the top 5 senators in American history that we want to lionize? And, no hesitation. They went right for the big three: Daniel Webster, John Calhoun, and Henry Clay.
I didn't think Webster was in it. I mean, I didn't think Clay was in it. Excuse me.
Yeah, they had Clay in it.
Okay.
Um, and they, slapped on two rather contemporary guys, just as a sort of, bow on top. But, who really cares about the guy who made NATO or, Social Security or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Well,
but
this is one of the first things. It's like kind of worth like
mhm,
sussing out a little bit because, when you think of the Senate today, I'm partial to a framework of American history that's referred
mhm,
to as the party system framework. Okay, and it sort of dictates that there's I think academic agent has actually, because I'm always fascinated by how academic agent receives American subjects. And this was something that I kind of believe he stumbled onto one time. And I don't think, it's like a child that finds a diamond and like throws it away because he was looking for a chocolate bar.
is
He
this
kind of,
the political party systems that we've
yeah,
had?
yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a very powerful framework. And there's a real way that you can chase it all the way down to that there is this concept that is America, that is this imperial entity that has existed since 1776, but that within that temporal envelope, within that idealized envelope, what is the United States of America, that we have actually had 7 distinctly different, there's not total agreement. I think I actually have one more than most people do. Yeah, I have 8 party systems, and I have the eighth party system concluding now. But one of the things is that that these are like really, I mean, these are not like, these are main eras in a real way.
Mhm,
So there's like with specific tendencies in terms of like the physical rules of how the government operates, the power relations, the factional relations, where everybody comes from. And we're really looking at between 7 and 8 different instances, temporal instances of the United States, and some of them are wildly different from one another. And this is what one of the things is, I'm like, when you told me you wanted to do this, I'm like, we're going to look at the
mhm,
speech, because I mean, it's difficult for us who have oddly 24-hour access to C-SPAN, so on and so forth. You can get up, you turn on the TV anytime you want to, and you can listen
mhm.
to Ted Cruz give some dumpy speech about like whatever it is. We do not think of the Senate in the same way they thought of the Senate. And that's why, if you look at the list of almost all of these senators that are in this book, Profiles in Courage, they're from the 19th century, and they're usually from the early 19th century. And this because we're, in the early 19th, in the late 18th and early, well, really actually in the early 19th century, in the year 1800,
Mhm.
an event in American history happened, which is referred to as the Jeffersonian Revolution, okay, or the Revolution of 1800. And this was a nearly complete, like if you actually go back to the first 2 administrations, Washington administration, the Adams administration, you actually find a presidency that looks much more like, it would be alien. It would be totally alien to contemporary, aesthetics. It was
Well,
actually that. Go
are
ahead.
are you trying to talk about, the very early, I guess, federal system, that
No, I'm talking about well, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Washington tried to, like, hold together with, duct tape and glue.
yeah.
But it fell apart almost immediately, and now we have partisan politics.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah, but I mean, the aesthetics of the presidency and the balance of power in the American government was much different than it was after. It was very early. The Federalists, they weren't monarchists, but they were more familiar with and sympathetic to sort of the classic trappings of power, of executive power in the old world, and so they had a lot more of these like military marches and this sort of thing. And the election
His
of
Majesty the President
his rotundity, like this is what they called
Adams.
Adams. And when the Revolution of 1800 happens, Jefferson famously rides into town. Jefferson famously comes out of retirement. I don't want to get into the mythology of Jefferson too much, but he famously comes out of retirement. He's been in retirement he's been sort of in retirement. He's actually been sort of in rebellion against Adams for quite some time, and he was Adams's vice president. But he wins this election, and famously he rides into town without a parade, without accompaniment or anything, on the morning before his inauguration, and he stops at a boarding house and sits down and gets lunch with everybody else. Now, Jefferson was a fucking ham, okay? Like, he's doing this very performatively. And he, like,
I thought he was much more of a recluse.
Well, he was a reclusive autist.
But he liked to, how do you say? He liked to wine and dine people over very nice hammy dinners.
He did like to eat well, but I'm gonna get into this in a second. So, like he belonged to the Francophile faction, which was generally referred to as the opposition faction that we refer to today as they were called the Republicans. Then in history books, you'll see them referred to as the Democratic Republicans, but really what they are is the institution that comes down to us today is the Democratic Party. And they were the Francophiles, and they were very smitten for French concepts and the French Revolution. And Jefferson is one of these people. He's an aristocrat in a way, but he mimes French fashions rather than English fashions. And the French at this point in time, they're going through this like spate of this spell of populism. And Jefferson he's sort of mindfully he's sort of primed to get one-shotted by these concepts because he already hates government. He hates government. It's strange to have this guy that's in charge of the government hate the government. But yeah, he serves 2 terms, and he conducts what's referred to as the textual presidency, which means he gives 0 interviews to the press in 8 years as president. None whatsoever. He gives 2
public speech. Like
2
almost
public
no
speeches.
Public speeches.
Well, yeah,
he doesn't talk to the press, doesn't talk to Congress, just sort
he,
of operates like a sort of almost a mafioso, delegating stuff through letters from Monticello remotely.
Yeah, the textual presidency. So in the morning, what he does is he wakes up. He has a circular letter that gets sent around to his secretaries, and they make amendments to it if they don't like something, and they send a report back, and then he circulates those reports to everyone else, and that's the government's business for the day, and that's the executive branch's business for the day. And in the meanwhile, he does the real business, the real social business of governing by holding these 3 nights a week. Usually, he has incredibly extravagant, long dinners with between 15 and 20 members of the American government, visiting dignitaries, so on and so forth. And he prefers to conduct business this way. Now, the upshot of this, though, is that during Jefferson's administration, Congress very clearly becomes the dominant branch of the American government, and it remains that way all the way up until at least the Jacksonian era. And we're going to actually pick up the story here at the very tail end of the Jacksonian era. But one of the things what's worth pointing out is that during this time, the role of being a senator is considered to be much more of a public celebrity figure than it is now, because as a result of the Jeffersonian Revolution, the United States develops this incredibly elaborate celebrity system of public debate and sort of democratic argumentation. This is based in large measure on the fact that most of these members of Congress, especially from the South and the West, were educated in what were called dissenting academies, Presbyterian dissenting academies, at which the main purpose of these backcountry Presbyterian dissenting academies is to provide citizens of the United States with the ability to read, understand, and debate the Bible. And the style of argumentation is it's influenced by more or less, really there's two main threads. One of them is reports, transcriptions, and fashions that float over from the British Parliament. And in Britain, this is also an era of the fantastic public rhetorics. Okay. And
not just the fact that it's almost, the Senate was almost structured to be like you said, the central platform for rhetoricians,
yeah,
and then especially, the most elite platform for rhetoricians, because you know, unlike today, senators were elected by the state legislatures, and there weren't exactly, um, you know, like you said, no CNN. Um, so what you ended up with were, how do you say, there are crowds of reporters that write down at what all of these speeches
yeah.
end up, like what everyone writes in their speeches, and they are incredibly, you know they're amazing by today's standards. Very
No, it's
coherent,
amazing. By this is a it's a
very
genuine.
coherent.
This is
Um,
a genuine golden age of public speaking. And every day when these things happen, the congressional galleries are packed. Like women get sexually excited and like faint in the middle of like these incredibly long Byzantine, highly formal debates that are occurring almost all the time. Okay.
it's all written down too. It's
Yeah,
very
well, it's written down pretty well. But like they were speaking, I'm always amazed whenever I look at these early, because this is not the same way the congressional record is kept now. We didn't start keeping it the way we did now until the 1870s. I'm always amazed at how actually granular the transcriptions are, but these characters will usually be referred to in the third person, that sort of thing. And yeah, at the end of the day, what'll happen is like, Mr. Calhoun said, Mr. So-and-so said, Mr. So-and-so said, and then these things, these reports will be filtered out across the country, and then all over the country, especially in what the great scholar, oh, good Lord, what is his name? The Italian one, Eugene Genovese, called, he has a great paper called "The Dulcet Tones of Christian Democratic Disputation in the Backcountry," in these backcountry towns where this incredible democratic culture is very real. Okay, and so in towns, what will happen is you'll get the paper will come in, and you'll get to see what Thomas Hart Benton and John C. Calhoun argued about in the Senate a day or two earlier. And then you'll find these incredible, dirt farmers and fur trappers are also having these incredibly, by today's standards, eloquent public debates about what the town's position on the goings on in Washington are going to be. And so at the same time,
I figure there are two good points to be made here. In the copy of Calhoun's works, it includes the first report that is essentially the reporters doing like a play-by-play of who said what when
Yeah.
before, during, and after the speech. And like you said, it's the first report's distributed among all the newspapers for the lay people to read, and then the second report, it's like the revised report, is the
Yeah.
actual transcription of the speech.
Yeah.
And the first report, um, Senator Tipton of Indiana says such and such. Mr. Calhoun expressed, hope, yada yada yada. Mr. C this, Mr. C that. Mr. Rives comes in with a chair and smacks Calhoun. Calhoun does, like a somersault. You know, very. It's a good. It's a lot more entertaining than C-SPAN, and
Yeah, I mean
it
it's
gives you some time.
incredibly entertaining because like one of the things that's real because all these guys are real, they're educated prime, they're usually lawyers and they've been educated formally in rhetoric, and they're always trying to do things. They're developing these incredible personal styles. Okay, so they all have the really talented ones. They start developing what like these very personal styles of argumentation, and you get to the point where what they're almost doing is dueling. Okay, and I'm still just characterizing the
Y-
I'm still just
I,
characterizing the environment
mhm.
here. Haven't we even start talking about Calhoun
Yeah.
yet?
I
Because
I well that's actually a very good way of bringing up Calhoun, because I had
yeah,
a second point, which was I believe a while ago you pointed out to me that Jefferson, he would, at these nice dinner parties, seat young up and coming congressmen from the backwoods right next to Russian aristocrat
he loved
dignitary.
doing this. Yes, he loved
And
doing this because like Jefferson, Jefferson was the first shit poster. He was the first American shit poster, and he loved doing things like and this is incredible to me. Like this is this is almost religious to me that we had a man that did things like this. But yeah, so what he would love to do is the guest list rotated every night. And what he would do is he would bring in a young senator, a young freshman member of Congress from one of the Western states. At the same time he would have the crown prince of Russia, and he'd sit them there. He would sit them together at the table, both to kind of spook the visiting European dignitaries and bring them down to bring them off guard and bring them down to a level where Jefferson himself could negotiate on behalf of America from more favorable social terms. But he also was very interested in continuity of government, of training these young acclimating these young Westerners and these young Southerners and these young. I mean, he was not really all that sectional. He would bring everybody in, acclimating these young politicians from this very young, very weak country in the environment that they would be operating in for what was their public careers. It's like, you might have been born
he's
in you might have been born in backcountry Kentucky, but you were going to have to go toe to toe with the ambassador from the British Empire. Yeah, you got to get
well,
used to this.
he's tutoring
Yeah,
and providing mentorship in a
yeah,
very how do you say, in a very forward-facing diplomatic way.
yes.
And he's cultivating a garden of Republican politicians
And this is
that
literally how he
say, yeah,
understands it. This is literally how he understands it. Because if we're going to talk about John C. Calhoun and Thomas Jefferson in the same breath, you have to understand that there is a through line. I mean, there is a living Southern tradition. So what makes the South interesting in terms of American regions is that we do in fact possess this very distinctive, continuous, very granular, and very vivid worldview. And I've characterized it in the past as being essentially that of a garden, because this is what we do. We farm things, we grow things. We're usually educated people that exist in nature. And this continues down to the day. You can scroll through my Twitter and you can see the things I'm interested in, and they correspond this garden concept. First of all, it's very English, and it's also very Southern. Okay, and this is exactly the way they understand it, and this is this is a quality that both Calhoun and Jefferson will share.
Calhoun, he's not from, I guess, the wealthy sort of coastal or central, South Carolina planter class. He's from
No,
the back. He's from the backwoods,
he's
and he's one.
from
He's like one of these young up and coming backwoods South Carolina, Scots Irish up and coming congressman.
He's certainly Scots Irish. Okay. And now here's one of the just now, yeah, to introduce John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun was born. He was born, I think, God, I can't remember exactly what year he was born. He was born in the late 1700s. I think he was born after the Revolution. But his father, I think, had been a Revolutionary War veteran, but that he was just like an irregular member of the militia. But I do know that John C. Calhoun's father.
83-ish.
Yeah. So John C. Calhoun's father was infamous as one of the anti-federalists. He was one of the. It's worth looking at South Carolina a little bit because the granularities of South Carolina are quite fascinating at this point in time. It is the state that has the least democracy of all of the states. Okay, and
you do have the backwoods. How do you say? Um, the folks, especially known for you know the words escaping me for sort of proto nullification of um, centralized authority.
yeah.
Um,
Okay. But this is like, this is
shoot,
the
what was it
beginning of
called?
this sort of populist sentiment. Okay. And really what's going on here is because South Carolina's interest, because South Carolina had a more powerful planter class than any other state. It had more powerful, centralized, and much smaller elite group than any other state. They were the most fixated with the concept of an aristocratic tradition. They were the most likely to fancy themselves literal aristocrats. They were, and when they set about organizing the government of South Carolina, they restricted political representation to essentially what boils down to the city of Charleston and then the rest of the state. And the representation was so lopsided that you go to there were blocks of Charleston that had their own state senator. And then out in the backcountry, this whole area that Calhoun is born in, it's called the 96th district, gets one. Okay, so they have this incredible.
I was looking for the term regulators.
Oh, the regulators.
Yeah, but that's North Carolina. But we're
Yeah.
still dealing with the same
Yes.
Sort of political circuit of
Yeah.
backwoods vigilantism.
Yeah. And so John C. Calhoun's father was an anti-federalist because, the South comes down to us as this, like the region that's most associated with states' rights and so on and so forth. But Charleston and my family were Charlestonian Federalists. Okay. So because the way, and you can actually usually divide Southern politics up by, the people who were planting what and where and who their market was. And so in South Carolina, in the coastal regions of South Carolina, the established elite class have been using slave labor to grow this product it's been revived by a guy that's a mentor of mine called Carolina Gold Rice. They're growing rice in the Low Country, and they're on the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina. This is where the majority of the large plantations are in South Carolina. And they're growing indigo and a very strange product called Sea Island cotton that is not the same cotton that we think of today. Most of the backcountry, especially at the time John C. Calhoun was born, most of the backcountry is very poor. It's very unsettled. And Eli Whitney has not invented the cotton gin yet. So these people that live back there are mostly hard scratch farmers. And Calhoun's father was a dirt farmer. He was an Indian fighter, and he was an anti-federalist. He was one of these people. It's just kind of incredible that these people were literate because because of the roughness of their lives. But he was also, he was literate. He was a Presbyterian Christian. or at least he was really probably more of a deist but he was educated as a Presbyterian Christian. And they have, even by the time of the constitutional ratification, of the constitutional debates, they have developed this severe antipathy towards those aristocrats in the Low Country. And the Calhoun family is interesting, because there is an aristocratic branch of the Calhoun family, and he actually marries his first cousin, who is a member of that family. But Calhoun is a singularly interesting figure in American history because he is of the South. He is certainly of the South, and he grows up in this severe puritanical Presbyterian world. And he learns to read, and he learns that, there's stories about Calhoun. He's plowing a cotton field. He's plowing fields during the summer, and he's got John Locke strapped to the back of the plow, and he's reading while he's going. But essentially what sort of happens is that Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, and all of a sudden, and the Industrial Revolution takes off in English, and all these people suddenly start making money, and they can kind of move around. And Calhoun is a curious example of them. Okay, and so he's comes from this background. His father's an Indian fighter and an anti-federalist. He is himself educated at a dissenting academy. And he grows up among, learning the philosophical arguments, the philosophical. He's under the absolute philosophical umbrella of the people that we call the Jeffersonians. Okay, and but he does this. He swerves. He does something interesting, which is that he goes to Yale also. Okay, through connections that were given to him by the wealthier side of his family that live down in Charleston. He's provided with an example, with a chance to go to Yale, and there he is under the tutelage of some of the greatest Federalist scholars of the age, and he learns to be a lawyer there. So he immediately has this thing that not many people do, which is that he's steeped in the opposition tradition of anti-federalism, yet he's also this kind of self-made prodigy that has gone north and imbibed the doctrines of federalism as well. So he's able to do crypsis in a way. He's a genuine synthesis of American political economy in a way that few have been. And throughout his career, this is one of the things I want to talk about: the people who start to develop their personal.
Here's a sort of question for you.
Yeah.
With regards to Yale, of course, was set up as a divinity school for Congregationalists. I believe.
Yeah.
How doesn't, I guess, the North develop the same dissenter, rhetorical schooling that dissenters in the South and West do?
I mean, some of it's cultural and some of it is like socioeconomic, for instance. But like it's there, you really want to, Scott, it's that biblical, it's a particular style of biblical argumentation that, and I don't want to be too determinist about this, but it is carried over from the Northumbrian borderers. And they're very clannish, they're very sort of publicly, they're willing to dispute things publicly, whereas the New England tradition is going to be more austere, quieter, more polite, kind of like the difference between you and me. If you really want to fucking, you're like, I am okay. You were definitely the more stable, more polite member of this pair right now, and I am steamrolling you with Southern Scots Irishness.
I give you a leash because, or no, as the Zoomers say, let them cook, and you are the Calhoun chef, specialized in Calhoun studies at Calhoun University. So, both politeness of the host and I guess, temperamental, temperamentally Yankee will, hold me back a little bit from the Scots Irish, confrontationalism.
A lot of this does, and a lot of this has come from the fact that we were slave owners and we were living we were living out on like in isolated clusters of plantations, and we were generally outnumbered by people that we kept in chains for the purpose of doing bonded labor. And they were occasionally want to rise up, and so we had to develop a very performative, loud style of masculinity that suggests violence, because you needed to be able to be violent at the drop of a hat to live in the
So
South.
that's actually a very good segue into, I guess, Calhoun's early political career, which is, notable war hawk John C. Calhoun as a young congressman.
So let's
You
go
know,
grab the other two real quick too, because yeah,
sure.
Calhoun comes to is well he has a career, he has a small career as a lawyer first of all, and then as a member of the state assembly in South Carolina. But he does, because he's incredibly talented, and everybody knows he's incredibly talented. He's also a smooth social operator. He marries well, and he quickly finds himself elected to Congress on the back of what is really the second great sort of populist wave, or in this case, but he's elected to the House of Representatives in South Carolina as a member of what we've referred to as the class of 1812. Okay, and this is for all the way until 1974. This was the class of congressmen that included the most freshmen. So, in a very real sense, because you're actually relatively close to the Revolution and in 1814, Jefferson is either just left office, and Madison is in office. Yeah, Madison's in office. So Madison is in office, and he's a founding father. The old guard of the revolutionary generation
Well, he
are,
was relatively young too, as far as
yeah, he's
founding
very
fathers
young.
go.
But yeah, and so the only founders that are really left in power still are James Monroe is his vice president, and Madison. They're the last two. They're the last two real holdovers from the genuine
Like
founding generation. But the
Madison was
Constitution,
like 60s at this
yeah,
point.
yeah, the constitutional the generation that ratified the Constitution, though, and were like the founding members of the first two Congresses, a lot of times they're still around, and there is this growing sort of generational friction between them and this younger, because we're adding states, by the way. The center population is drifting further and further south, as this cotton prosperity allows us to do the early versions of Manifest Destiny, and we're adding.
Well,
We had
one
Tennessee, we had Alabama, we had Georgia. We start really piling these Scots Irish hillbillies who had been relatively contained in earlier, at earlier points, have started to really
Well,
exert
you have the
themselves.
was it the Land Ordinance Act, or
Yeah.
was it called? Yeah, the which opens up, was it Ohio, like the entire American nor was like the Midwest essentially. We
Oh, the
had,
Northwest Ordinance.
yeah, the Northwest Ordinance, that's what it is. After, winning these nasty Indian wars,
Yeah.
we open up, we get the entire South from Britain after the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Um, I like to sort of differentiate the first from second generations of uh, U.S. congressmen from,
Yeah.
Federalist versus, the second wave of Republicans, because y- all of the sort of you have a very early the early Republic generation of army officers who become politicians, who want to
Yeah.
get paid. They're
Yeah.
want to get paid, want to be able to, you know, give the American Revolutionary Army officers their what's it called, um, their stipends essentially, and so they want to actually fund the American government through taxation and tariffs and whatnot. And they were constantly on guard for possible threats from foreign powers
Yeah.
by building up all sorts of fortifications, investing in a navy, still in a very wartime mentality. And
They're in a very wartime mentality, but there are some other things that there are some distinct differences that tie into even the global IGUS of like
sure.
the world trajectory of ideas that change. These guys are very the 18th these are creatures of the 18th century in every conceivable way. They're members, they're rationalists, they're believers in the Enlightenment, and they're relatively there are two things worth of remember. Two things become very important here is that they are almost all very skeptical of the power of government. They are very skeptical of America's ability. They're very skeptical of armies. They still have that founding generation, that Jefferson, that founding generation twitch about the idea of standing armies. And as a result of this, like you say, we won these Indian wars, but this is a point in time where we're still occasionally getting our shit pushed in by Indians. And at one point, the American army has been reduced to, I think, 2 brigades and like 4 light batteries. And it's the whole army that we have.
We eventually, Washington passes the Militia Act that allows the federal government to nationalize state militias in times of emergencies, specifically to put down like Indian rebellion, the Indian Wars, and first time it was used was on the Whiskey Rebellion, but
yeah,
it was ultimately used for the Indian Wars and in the Northwest Indian War with was it General Mad Anthony Wayne,
yeah,
and then eventually, Tecumseh's rebellion or Tecumseh's war, and all these Creek Wars and what have you. But like you said, there really isn't much of a standing army, and the militia, it wasn't really something you volunteered for. It was basically the draft.
yeah,
For just about all the guys between ages of 18 and 60, usually.
yeah.
So yeah, that's how you'd characterize the first few presidential terms in the very, very early republic. But now
Yeah,
we're getting into, the old boomers are starting to die out or starting to retire,
yeah,
and
and
this is Madison's
a
term.
very good analogy to make because under the tutelage of under the umbrella of these early administrations, there is a younger generation that is growing up, and they are not as cautious in a lot of they're not as cautious and they're not as skeptical. The materials that they're educated on are starting to dip into what we would call that of the romantic. And really, nationalism is born out of like sort of romantic concepts. They grew up under the shadow of these trade disputes in the Adams and Jefferson administrations, where the United States gets kicked around quite a bit by both the British and the French. Okay, so we have these. This is during the time when the Napoleonic Wars are occurring.
So when Washington says, don't get involved in foreign entanglements, it means don't get our wires crossed with regards to British and French alliances.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also the Russians, because the Russians are and I've done shows with Prude on this, so you can go look them up.
Mhm.
Where I've talked about how like the Great Game, which is ongoing between the Russians and the British, like starts to become very important here because they're the America is an ancillary sphere of that. But the most important thing that's happening is that America is a relatively weak military nation, but we're starting to get our sea legs, okay? And this generation that comes up, and they're referred to as the Warhawk generation. They are there is a tidal wave of what we would refer to as romantic nationalist sentiment as a result of increasing frictions between the British and the increasing. There are a couple of things that are going on. The British because the British are they still haven't totally given up on the idea that like whatever this bullshit we're doing isn't going to last. And so they're still harassing us at the edges of what we refer to as our borders. And if you remember, if you refer to
They still have fortifications with
they have
guys.
fortifications.
Yeah,
The
and
way
they
they're
don't really respect our borders.
right.
With like the Chesapeake Leonard
Yeah,
affair. It's
in
like,
the south we have a trade route that runs from because the Spanish are in New Orleans, or the we have and really, yeah, I mean, we had New Orleans at this we had New Orleans at this point, but the area between New Orleans and Georgia was still owned by the Spanish. And we have these trails that we use to get to go trade with the Spanish and do business with Latin America. And run trekking through going along that road, the way the British sort of harass us is what they tend to do is they ally with the Native American tribes, and the Native American tribes, famously the Seminole, and whichever ones we punish the hardest and the firstest, they were usually the ones that were taking money from the British. They were taking money, guns, and supplies from the British, and they
this
were
is the
harassed.
famous who were the two British spies that were caught running guns to the Seminoles?
Oh, I can't remember.
I forget what their names
I'm
were,
getting old.
but Andrew Jackson notoriously, executed them.
Yeah.
And he also he blew up, it was called Negro Fort. It was like a little Seminole and escaped slave, like essentially like a little rallying point for them to launch raids onto Americans.
Yeah.
But they did the Brits did this both in the North and the South. Um, and I've found all sorts of like niche stories of the Brits just giving guns to uppity natives all across the Americas.
Yeah.
Like in the Yucatan Peninsula, they supported like this cult of like the stick saint or whatever
Yeah,
to kill all
doing crazy stuff. Yeah.
to like kill all of like the Mexican Yucatan like liberals. Like they also like ran guns to slaves in Cuba and stuff like that. Um, but
Yeah,
they,
all kinds
yeah,
of fun things going on. But the important thing the important thing for what we're talking about now, again, Calhoun, of course, Calhoun's father was killed in one of these Indian raids, and so this is he's swept into Congress. He's a member of this Congress of 1814. Now we get to introduce another one of our figures. Okay, so he arrives in Washington in 1812. And it's a cantankerous party because like this is this faction that has had it with they're in classic bold American fashion. They're very optimistic. Okay, and they're sick and tired of dealing with these British incursions on our border.
oh,
What
here
we're
it
gonna
is.
do.
The R, like the Arbroath, like an R Ambrister. Yeah, that was what that affair was. Yeah,
Armbruster.
Armbruster.
Yeah. And so they're mad. They're mad enough. They're mad enough about what's been going about relatively the timidity of the previous generation, that they've even concocted this plan where we're going to, as a result of, we're going to use these Indian raids and this impressment of, the impressment of sailors. And they're going to use that as an excuse to launch an invasion of Canada. And
Like I said earlier, the Brits, they fired upon the USS Chesapeake while it was essentially like right next to a port, and
yeah,
dragged off a bunch of guys and executed a few of them.
yeah.
That was not cool. Giving
No, I mean it's
arms,
very
yeah.
clear. It's very clear provocation. Okay, yeah, it's very clear provocation. And so but like in this national tide, this great wave of national outrage, the elections of 1812 occur, and this faction that becomes known as the Warhawks is swept into power, and they arrive in Washington. To be sworn in, and they're so cantankerous. They like the night, because you did the early. These are heavy. Calhoun is not a drinker, but his compatriots and his colleagues are heavy drinkers. They drank the town dry, and they did things that they weren't necessarily supposed to do, which was they gathered at an inn the night before they were all sworn in, and they virtually by mob assent, they elected their Speaker of the House, and the man they elected was a man who had been appointed as the interim senator from the state of Kentucky, but his term was over, and he's switching over to the House of Representatives. He was the youngest man at the time ever appointed to the United States Senate, and his name was Henry Clay. Okay, and so that is the second member of this group that becomes known as the Great Triumvirate. Okay, and they are the sort of the factional breakdown in this Congress is sort of interesting. It's maybe worth looking at. Where did my sheet go? Okay, it's the last one. Yeah.
So we just introduced Henry Clay. So what I have up on screen is how JFK, in this committee, described the Great Triumvirate. He said, one contemporary said that Clay was a bad man, an imposter, a creator of wicked schemes. Is this a fair allegation?
Yeah, it's a totally fair allegation. He was not a good person. This is not someone whose morality. This is he's
known as the Great Compromiser.
Yeah, because he's a wheeler and a dealer. He's like when you imagine the boss hog style Southern politician where he's like, well, here's what we're gonna do is that's Henry Clay.
He's backwoods, supporter of all sorts of wild investments and schemes.
Wildcat and get rich quick schemes. He's very personally similar to Andrew Jackson, though they hate each other because naturally they hate each other. And Henry Clay, his core beliefs, this is interesting because he's probably the most ideal form of this new disposition that's arising out of the destruction of the Federalist Party. These people are no longer Federalists, okay? They're really a faction of the Democratic Republican Party. But they don't share the Federalists' love of central banking and that sort of thing. Really, particularly, they're not particularly scholarly, but they do like the idea of using the U.S. government as a money printer for themselves and their friends. And as a result of that, they think, well, if we're going to do that, what we need is the biggest, richest, most powerful country because we want a big ass money printer to help our friends. Okay. And so their core beliefs are they're nationalists, they're expansionists, they're pro-military, pro-infrastructure. This is a big one. This is they demand war with Britain to vindicate the national honor and secure our Western and frontier interests. Okay, and their central figure is certainly Calhoun. And there's also a group left in Congress that's called the Tertium Quids, which is probably the most famous members, John Randolph of Roanoke. And these are famous adherents of the orthodox Jeffersonianism. Jeffersonianism is like American Marxism. It's got so many different, it's got an incredible genealogy. And we're actually all Jeffersonians. But they are adherents of what is called the strict constructionist school of constitutional thought. They are nearly anarchists in the sense that they don't believe in they're libertarian. They're a lot of y'all are a lot of your sort would align with this faction. They're anti-army, anti-debt, anti-bank. They're agrarian localists, and they tended to think that the Warhawks were closeted Federalists, and this isn't necessarily a bad characterization, actually. Then
during the War of 1812, famously the Federalist Party, their opposition, kind of shot themselves in the head at the Hartford Convention.
The Hartford. I don't think the Hartford Convention hasn't quite happened yet because we'll get there.
Okay.
the Madison administration lackeys, and so this is going to be like Albert Gallatin and William Crawford. These are like moderate Jeffersonians that are really they're the president's men in Congress. And then there is this last little group who are remnants. They are the remnant of what was the old Federalist Party.
Well, like I heard my guy mentioned Albert Gallatin. He's like a 5'4" like Swiss guy,
Yeah,
but he creates a sort of utopian little commune out here in Pittsburgh,
yeah.
and I've visited like his little monument out here. Um,
Oh, that would be cool.
he,
I would like to
he
see that.
he was also sort of like the secretary running the Whiskey Rebellion stuff.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
He kind of noped out as soon as things got a little bit too vigilante, and
Yeah,
sort of preserved his career after that. But then he became, the Virginia dynasty's, their treasurer
yeah.
for the next few
He's there.
presidents.
That's what it is. This faction is they're in Congress, but they're the president's men. They are the operators on behalf, the direct behalf of and that's how the executive branch really under the Virginia dynasty and the Jeffersonian system. The way the president exerts the power of the executive is through their kept men in Congress. So the presidency is like this kind of like this paper shuffling office, and then they also direct direct traffic in the House of Representatives usually. But this last group is probably the one that's most important left, because they are functionally the rump of the old Federalist state. So you can imagine this revolution has occurred, but it's left this rump state in what used to be called the Eastern States, but today we call them New England. They're represented probably most strongly by Josiah Quincy III, Timothy Pickering, and then this other character who is also elected he's elected in a by-election after this Congress has already started, Daniel Webster. And they are temperamentally, and for a lot of reasons, they're anti-war, they're pro-commerce, which frames them, which in the context of what they are, they end up being sort of unfairly painted into the role of being pro-Britain. And they kind of are, because what they're usually involved in is shipping. And, and when you're involved in shipping and in the Atlantic in the 19th century, almost all of your business is with Britain. And if it's not with Britain, it's being policed by Britain. So you're very interested in keeping the British Empire at least, willing to let you operate. This would be like today, doing what the Warhawks and the Madisonians are trying to do here, which is to declare war on Great Britain. This would be roughly similar, like in stature and in point of fact. This is like if Mexico declared war on us over the issue of shipping in the Gulf of Mexico. Like that's how lopsided it is,
As a little prelude, in I think it's about 3 weeks, I'm actually having a few Canadians on to talk about how the War of 1812 is taught in Canada.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm having on Dimes and Fortisax, and
Okay.
hopefully another
the dynamic duo. I like to imagine them sitting down and their faces flap like in South Park, so I mean that's really the only thing we need to. Yeah, that's really Daniel Webster he's the young gun that is elected out of this group. And so these three guys, I think it's really important to point out that they all come into public life in the same Congress. And again, like I said, this is a particularly weak, a tactically and strategically weak period for the executive branch. And so they are able to more or less push this old generation out, and under the tutelage, and sometimes under their cleverness of their subversion of the Madison and Monroe administrations, they are able to put themselves at relatively young ages in this position of extreme authority, of a nearly legendary authority in their own lives, in terms of like most powerful people in the American government. So other than almost certainly Andrew Jackson, between the years of, well, I guess John Quincy Adams is around until the 1820s, but certainly between
Well, he
1825.
does end up fighting Calhoun in this particular speech that we're going to get to.
Right. Yeah. John C. Calhoun. I mean, John C. Calhoun, Daniel Webster, and Henry Clay are without a doubt the protagonists of the American government, and they preside over several main paradigmatic shifts, and they even change parties sometimes. Well, Clay and so like, and they form like a classic triumvirate, because Clay, out of the Warhawk faction, it sort of splits into what is today understood as the Democrats, and then the other faction, the Clay faction, became known as the Whig Party. Clay is steadfastly devoted to the Whig Party, and Webster is sort of steadfastly devoted to New England, and so their interests never really changed that much. But Calhoun is a very interesting figure who he gets accused in his own life of snakishness, of ambition, of waffling back and forth, because and then scholars have famously treated him as this character that comes into Congress as a war hawk, and he eventually becomes an arch secessionist. I am not so certain that that's really what happens, but he is a pragmatic politician, and of this three-member triumvirate, he is the loose cannon. So he, and in a sense, he's the guy who he becomes in a very real sense the unsung, like, sort of kingmaker in Washington D.C. for most of the early 19th century, precisely because he's unusually willing to throw his own South Carolina constituency under the bus over what he's criticized for as his adherence to abstract principle. Okay. And whenever we're talking about those personal styles that these people develop, Henry Clay develops this personal rhetorical style that is very flamboyant and very entertaining. And he is essentially a bulldozer. Okay. And what he does is he's got his gang of Western ruffians, and he whips them into a frenzy, and they cheer all the way through his speeches, and they make noise, and they just intimidate everyone, and they spit tobacco everywhere. And, they kind of play up the homespunness, but they're also very sophisticated. Webster is this sort of in the more Adamsian tradition. He is more of a quiet scholar.
He's a lawyer by trade.
He's really a lawyer.
Corporate law.
Yeah. Corporate law. Yeah. And he's got a much more soft-spoken voice, but he is probably, in terms of formal rhetoric and in terms of classical allusions and this sort of thing, he is probably the sharpest knife. But he's more like Clay is an axe, and he's more like a scalpel. Calhoun, on the other hand, is the pistol. Okay, he's the when you think of the he is unlike Clay and unlike Webster. New Englanders love this is the way they're very Anglo. They don't like abstractions. They like very granular argumentation, empiricism.
Well, in the speech that we'll get to, like I promise, guys, it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. This is all important.
But he does say, this speech is going to be about slavery.
Yeah.
And he says, essentially, to hell with abstractions. I'm talking about the situation on the ground.
Yeah.
And yeah. These are the XYZ, 1, 2, 3.
Show me on the doll.
These are the points on the doll where I'm hurting, and this is where my pistol's at.
Right.
Yeah.
Calhoun, on the other hand, he's the philosopher. And one of my mentors, Don Livingston, actually said that Calhoun is maybe the only actual political philosopher that America has ever produced. And he is famous not only for his height. He's very tall. When he's young, he's very good looking. The ladies in Washington love him. Okay, but he is this austere puritanical figure who is nonetheless a Southern aristocrat, and he's a slaveholder, and he's engaged in because he shares some things with Clay. He's very interested in building infrastructure in the South. He's very interested in building domestic markets. He's very interested in expansionism in the abstract sense, and he never really changes his mind about these things. But the thing he is most criticized for, he's criticized mainly for three things. One is his tendency to ambition. And early in his career, before 1832, he certainly had presidential ambitions. And he is a deft operator in the sense that he's the only man in United States history to be vice president under two presidents. He's the Secretary of War at one point he's the Secretary of War under Monroe. And then he's the Secretary of State much later. I think it's after the speech that we're going to get to.
This show being named the Nautical Chronicle, under Calhoun as Secretary of War, he oversaw the construction of the only ships of the line that America ever produced.
Yeah.
It was 74 gunners, none of which actually saw like any action. But
yeah, because it's important to build them.
It was essentially what they did was they produced about 90% of it, and then kept it in the freezer until they needed them thawed out, and then finished up the last 10% whenever things got kind of hot.
Yeah.
So Secretary of War under Secretary of War under Monroe, Vice President under was it John Quincy Adams?
John Quincy, and then
Jackson, right?
Yeah.
And he then ends up becoming Secretary of War again. Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, briefly.
Because is actually kind of interesting how that happened. I kind of have to go on this tangent because it's the Nautical Chronicle. Essentially, we were testing out this brand new type of gun on our most sophisticated steam frigate, but
that ship blew up and killed everybody. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it blew up the Secretary of State, blew up the Secretary of Navy, and it blew up the president's father-in-law. That's how he ended up as Secretary of State.
Yeah. And it's a very short tenure as Secretary of State, but
everyone quits Tyler's administration.
But it's consequential because he ends up, and this is one of his flip-flops earlier, because he had opposed the entry of Texas into the Union. He ends up as Secretary of State, shepherds Texas into the Union, and he also settles the border dispute with Great Britain in the Pacific Northwest. So it ends up being quite consequential, but is relatively short tenure as Secretary of State. But I guess we could probably fast forward at this point to 1830. Well, actually, let me just go ahead and introduce some of these other characters. I'm just going to name them real fast.
We have to name Jackson, of course.
Yeah. But there are a couple of characters that are they're Whigs and they're Clay factions, and they're Westerners and they're Libertarians, and this is the characters that are generally Calhoun's main antagonists throughout his career. Now, of course, there's Henry Clay. Though he and Henry Clay and Daniel Webster would occasionally combine against one another over specific issues. So these lines are not necessarily drawn in the sand, but Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri is almost like he's like Calhoun's reply guy, and he exists to troll John C. Calhoun. And there's I think William R. King is one of his more steadfast allies, but Calhoun is one of these figures that there are the factions, and what is this 1837 Congress?
37.
Yeah, this 1837. He has his own faction at this point. So this is to skip ahead to 1837 real quick. We're now in the winter of 1837. There are 52 senators representing 26 states. The party balance is the Democrats, and Calhoun is sitting with the Democrats during this administration. There are 30 of them. and there are 22 anti-Jacksonians. Okay, and
Well,
in terms,
the just set up the sort of topics on the table. The last 20 years have been mostly over tariffs and infrastructure projects and funding, but the issue of slavery is starting to actually become a national concern, and people are starting to, throw petitions one way or another for various reasons. And
you
you
could
have, yeah.
you could tell I have a reticence. We're an hour and 15 minutes into this show, and I have not talked about slavery very much. But yeah, before I introduce the 1837 Congress, we'll go ahead and talk about the main trajectory of the main curve of American internal politicking over this period. And really, I have to go talk about Reinhard Koselleck because, well, actually, no, we don't have to do that today. But the thing that goes is that, of course, the main. It's important to note that these parties exist, but that perhaps even more than party affiliation at this point in time in American politics, the primary distinguisher is section. Like if you think about Nick Land and inside the exiting the cracker factory, we have the Anglos, especially when Anglos have space, they tend to fracture spatially rather than ideologically. And so, section and internal ethnicity, are usually better social loyalty predictors inside Congress than even nominal party affiliation sometimes. So there are Whigs in the South, but they're going to Whigs in the South. You're a Whig in the South. The reason what Whigs are is a party that generally favors central banking for the development of credit so we can lend in an internal market and build infrastructure. Calhoun occasionally sits with them, and he is actually very committed throughout his entire life to the idea of a strong national government. And this is what I think people get wrong, but we're not going to go there today. But he's very committed to a strong national government. But he's Southern Whigs will tend to vote with Southern Democrats on this issue of slavery. And slavery it's important because slavery is a thing that has existed in the Western world since the British. Well, if we could go all the way back to the mid 16th century, and the Spanish have slaves in their colonies. America, when the English initially, when they successfully colonized, because it took a long time for the English to get into the colonization game. When they successfully colonized Virginia, they very quickly attempt to do things with indentured servants, which are the enslaved Irish and brought them over because they're also, this is so long ago that, the English Civil Wars are relevant and the Cromwellian revolt.
Well, one of the things I discussed in my Whiskey Rebellion article is that we had German slaves here, where essentially the Dutch would kidnap starving Germans
Oh,
from
the patroons,
yeah,
the Van Rensselaers.
Well, not necessarily, but war ravaged from French armies. The Dutch would essentially pick them up, evacuate them, and then starve them in the Philadelphia harbor until they signed themselves away for however many years, and put them on the Quaker farms. But it worked. Some of them ended up doing quite well for themselves.
Right.
But Bacon's Rebellion happens.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Bacon's Rebellion happens. There are all kinds of things that are sort of happening, but we rapidly converge on this system of buying Negro slaves out of Africa and using them as bonded labor on our plantations. And the way this becomes really central to American politics is that early on, because the thing about slavery in the aggregate is that it's actually in the 200 or so years in which Englishmen were holding slaves in in North American territories, it's not very profitable most of the time. In fact, most of the time, it's at best a holding action. Okay, so like the real driver of American wealth was in land speculation, and then the real value in owning, the real moneymaker in owning slaves. And one of the things that I always have to point out about slavery is that when you think of like movies where they show the picking the cotton and everything like that, it was actually usually the women doing that. The like the buck slaves, the big the big
Yep,
strong
to do
men.
land clearing.
They were leased out for land clearing because that's the more improving land is the more profitable venture. You can get rich really fast doing that.
So in terms of cash flow, you set up you clear 10-20 acres of land. You have slaves work the fields for whatever product you're trying to ship out. You're at the mercy of the commodities market.
Well, there's a couple of things. If you really want to build this chain up real fast.
Well, yeah, sure. And then I was going to say, land clearing.
Yeah.
You buy 10,000 acres of frontier land for pennies on the dollar, or for pennies per acre.
Right.
You divvy up the plots and sell them, a few more cents an acre markup.
Yeah.
Based
So
off
here's
the
how.
plots.
Yeah. So here's how it works. I mean, just to go grab slavery again. So slavery it's very profitable in the Caribbean when sugar and nutmeg are very popular items to grow. The English in the Caribbean were very successful with sugar and coffee and nutmeg and a couple other weird things, vanilla. Briefly, and then the margins on those commodities starts to drop rapidly, and slavery is relatively unprofitable again. And then it gets boosted again in the 17th century, especially based on Virginia tidewater planters growing tobacco. But one of the things that's interesting is that the market, the commodity crash in tobacco happens. And it's one of the things that precipitates the American Revolution. It's like, like all those founding fathers, they were all in debt. All those Southerners were in debt because they were borrowing more than they were making from growing cotton so there are moments when there are moments in early American history where it looks like slavery might not happen. Like, Jefferson himself was ideologically anti-slavery. He's never able to free his slaves because, again, he died in incredible debt. He doesn't have the financial ability to get rid of them. But
I guess I'd like to make, I guess, 2 quick points. The first, I've read too many books on American tobacco.
Yeah.
And I've read several, of these Southern founding fathers talk about, tobacco didn't make much money, but I got to keep it going for, tradition and just to keep the seeds,
Yeah.
just in case it might become profitable one day. So yeah, it wasn't something of a holding pattern for that particular crop. The second was the way that they talked about slavery as an issue in the late 18th century. It's and sort of slavery apologetics as in this particular period.
Well, you're not going to see, and it's really not until relatively late in the game that you start to see. I mean, South Carolina, like, defense of slavery in the abstract is relatively tactical, and it usually, like when during the ratification debates for the Constitution, we almost left slavery out, but because the tobacco planters weren't making any money, but the rice planters in South Carolina were still making money, and they were very loud and very adamant about they also have a slave trade, and they're still making money importing slaves so they're very adamant about protecting both the slave trade and the use of slave labor. But and then of course with when the cotton gin opens up all of this vast backcountry to the growth of what's called number 36 upland staple cotton, all those hillbillies and anti-federalists and dissenters suddenly get access to the money printer, and they are increasingly of, and they're not, they don't like taxes of any kind. They don't like impositions of any kind. They say we're gonna keep these black slaves, and we're going to keep printing money. And that brings us to the second issue, which is that of the tariff, because the United States Constitution does not give any real mechanism until the 20th century, does not give any real mechanism for levying taxes. So
just to put a certain time period on this, right? So the cotton gin comes out in 1794, I believe.
yeah, I was gonna say it's either
And
1792 or
yeah,
1796, but it's the
and
middles. Yeah, it's 1794.
we win these various Indian wars in the 1790s, opening up the back country, and we also establish formal diplomatic relations and relations with Spain in, I think, 95 or 96. So we get to use the port of New Orleans, and then we just buy it anyways. So by 1800, the West is entirely ripe for the picking, so to speak.
Yeah, no, and it's also important that the type of cotton that they're growing is different. This is a thing that's called a number 35 upland staple. It's a short staple cotton, and it is the reason it's because, I mean, cotton has a long history as a luxury fabric. It's actually not a very good utilitarian fabric. Everything I'm wearing right now is cotton, and my family's been growing cotton for 400 years. And but I'm like, I'm perfectly willing to admit that cotton is actually not a good thing to make clothes out of. It was a luxury. It was an aristocratic luxury material from India for the longest time, and then we snuck it back over here. And but it is exceptionally good for industrial textile production. And as the textile mills of Northern England start to swing into motion, Britain, of course, is famously, it's a resource-starved island. So they have to import all their raw materials for their industrial production. And so they start buying, this combination of this new type of cotton being developed. It's not this longer Sea Island cotton, which is still very luxurious.
Isn't that what the Virginians mostly used?
No, they're mostly growing. Well, they might have mostly used it. I have a set of Sea Island cotton socks, and it's a very unusual material that, but the fibers are much longer, and that it doesn't work as well in this new gen in these industrial spindles. So the British, I mean, these newly enriched backcountry farmers are starting to make shitloads of money selling cotton to the Brits. But yeah, to go back and grab that original chain, the way these people become wealthy is usually not via they're entering a holding pattern. It's sort of like your plantation. Whenever you get it, you're still making a lot of money, but you're also spending a lot of money on it. And so the margin wasn't as high as you. This is like, it's like investing in T-bills in a very real way. It's the invest in the S&P or the T-bills of the Southern gentry of the night. The way they become wealthy, and this will tell you a lot about America. This will tell you why, for instance, people like George Washington why is this weird job called land surveyor? Why is it so important? What would happen is that the government would send out a survey crew to go survey tracts of land, and then the survey crew would go out there and they would make their marks. They would come back and they'd give a report to the government. The government would decide how much this land to sell and to whom, and
Based
then
off of what type of soils and what type
yeah.
of topography and geology.
And so physical, social proximity to the guy that surveyed that land first is first
Insider
mover.
trading.
It's
Where are the good lands
it's
buy
insider
up.
trading. Okay, so and of course the good land is always in the really predictable locations. It's like in the Mississippi Valley and like along the Black Belt in Alabama, which is it's the remnants of a prehistoric of an ancient inland sea, and then there are all these mollusks, all of these shellfish died and rotted and created this like band of black dirt in Alabama. That's really so. Plantation agriculture is actually not as widespread. It's densely clustered in an archipelago across the southern states. But the way this works is like, okay, if you're already pretty wealthy, you have the money to buy shitloads of that land at one time, and then you can maybe have it surveyed privately, and then you get it through the government, and then you start doling it out on the secondary market. And oh, by the way, you want to rent my slaves to clear this land, and that's where like money, money printer, total amount of money in the United States starts increasing rapidly. And in the meantime, the Yankees up there, they're still making money shipping, but New England is starting to enter a kind of economic depression at the moment when all of these southern sources of slave-based economies are revving up. And almost everyone in the U.S. government agreed on that, at least in principle, it was not good for us to be doing all of our business. Like, it was not good for the nation's one real source of wealth to be trading cotton with our direct enemy. You would think we would learn things like this, but it's very much a China-U.S. situation right now. It's like, do we really want to be that economically dependent on these guys that absolutely don't have our best interests in mind? And this is really the matrix that early 19th century politics happens in. Because there is this question: how are we going to build infrastructure? Okay, how are we going to build the infrastructure that we need to develop an internal market so these southern planters can stop selling all their cotton to Britain? The only way we really have to do this is to levy tariffs on these planters for doing the only thing that makes any money. Okay, and so the tariff question becomes the other main question in American politics in the 19th century. The Whig faction is generally in favor of high tariffs that are then absorbed by the Bank of the United States to establish, or Bank of the United States, or by the U.S. government to establish credit, which is then relent out to usually New Englanders, Pennsylvanians, and New Englanders for the purpose of building textile mills and industrial facilities of our own. You can see how this could be contentious.
Well, yeah. Like you said earlier, it's the Whigs want to produce this this profitable internal market that isn't reliant on exporting, like you said, our biggest cash crop to our foreign adversaries by creating, like, on the U.S. federal government, its budget's dole, by tariffing and making it more expensive to import foreign luxury goods than it is to produce them at home. But at the same time, this makes these goods more expensive, or at least
Yeah,
at least in the short term while we're building this infrastructure.
And British because the British aren't just sitting there and letting this happen. The British retaliation is, again, because we don't have furniture manufacturing, that sort of thing. These Southerners are all buying this shit on credit. So there's this incredible traffic in like household manufactured goods, canned food items, all of the things that are coming out of industrial Britain, and the Southern planters are paying them directly. Okay, and so and the British are, in response to these tariffs, they do the same thing China does, and they raise their prices too, and so things start to get incredibly expensive for these Southern planters. And it really it comes to a head a number of times, but it really comes to a head in this issue, in the question of the tariff of abominations, which is one of the one of the great turning points. This is a tariff that is imposed that's actually so high it ultimately ends up being an excise tax on 40 cents on every 40 cents produced by the American South, that is then rerouted north to subsidize the growth of these economies. Of course, in the meantime, these these cultural issues, and these are very grave moral issues with slavery on the part of the New England Puritans, and this cultural divide between these two groups starts to widen, where
You can't leave out the Quakers, of course.
the Quakers.
So
Oh my God.
we had the first first was it the first petition to end slavery in like the 1690s. I actually have two ancestors that signed it. But yeah, Quakers. But they really weren't too much around here anymore.
There's like
But
3 of them. There's like 8 of them left, I
well,
think, aren't there?
actually, there are exactly 2 Shakers left.
Yeah, I was reading about that. I was reading about that. Yeah.
They made excellent furniture, but not having children seems to be not very good for your faith. There are quite a few Quakers still around, but the only ones that I've actually seen in real life are like middle-aged sort of women
Yeah, I
uh,
imagine like
at
the
like
like
at
if
like
they
charity
if
things.
right, yeah, if they were on the West Coast, they'd be like wearing like tie-dye shirts with tie-dye sweatshirts with cats on them,
Yeah.
Um, but so yeah, and these two
Like
issues.
what exactly is the state of sort of, I guess, moralistic sort of northern abolitionism by the 1830s?
Oh, by the 1830s, it's starting to get, as a result of really a lot of British romantic influence, British aesthetic, British romantic influence, and like even the British famously, they abolished slavery, and they go on this moral crusade. It actually was one of the first examples of telescopic philanthropy, and this is also when I talk about this is British meddling in American politics, where they start leaning on, and they're always doing this British thing. They always try to have their cake and eat it too. They still want the cotton, but they're, in Britain, the factions, the Manchester industrialists, who are usually, they're a faction in Parliament, and they are heavily in favor of the South and slavery. And then like Southern England, the Oxbridge set have developed these like sort of fantastical romantic delusions about morality, and they've like embarked on the great Anglo Crusade to liberate everything, and they're pressuring, and they tend to be more aligned with the New Englanders tend to be more aligned with them as a result of their shared sort of stints in German universities. German romanticism comes over to them, and these moral divides also start to grow. Okay, and really the issues get entwined by 1832, which is the first real breaking. Well, I guess the other issue, the way the slavery issue.
The central bank and the collateralization of slaves.
Well, okay, yeah, then yeah, I gotta do
Well,
this first.
and the Sandbatch hypothesis.
Yeah, we got to do that. We got to do this first though, because
Sure.
it's 7:40. We haven't even gotten to the speech yet. But really the point where these two issues come into alignment with one another is when a combination of sectional animosity and the economic need for these tariffs causes the North to impose this tariff of abominations on the export market. And South Carolina kind of shoots itself in the foot because they try to do a fancy, and they threaten to secede from the Union if for some reason they end up voting for it as some kind of ridiculous gambit. And then whenever it passes, they immediately start threatening to secede from the Union, and that creates the nullification crisis. And this is the point in Calhoun's career whenever people generally think that he starts to turn towards secessionism, because South Carolina, because he becomes an outspoken proponent of the ability of state governments to nullify laws passed by the federal government. And what this really does, though, what the whole nullification crisis does, though, is it really ultimately the nullification crisis combined with the ascent of the Jacksonian Democrats, who enfranchise all white men, and white men tend to not like being taxed. The tariffs are not only are the tariffs are more or less negated, and the Bank of the United States is shut down. Okay, and what this does in a really strange way, though, is like all of these issues, these hot button issues that characterize the first and second congressional system, they go away. Okay, and so like, there might have been Southern Whigs that were growing sugar in Louisiana that were in favor of the Whigs sometimes, and because they also favor the development of internal markets. Now that the tariff has more or less been defeated, and the actual voting rolls have been flooded with these upland cotton farmers, the tariff issue kind of goes away, and so the other actual structural issue that's left is this cultural one. And so now the North begins to really having nothing left, having no other real issues to debate on, or to exercise this sectional animosity on. More and more pressure starts being placed on the slavery question in the abstract, the moral foundations of slavery, and so on and so forth. And now we arrive in 1837 at the rump end. Andrew Jackson is John C. Calhoun was Andrew Jackson's vice president, but they hated each other. The two men that were born both very close to one another in the Waxhaw Mountains in South Carolina, grew up very similarly, but they hate each other.
The famous Peggy Eaton affair.
Oh, the Peggy Eaton affair. That's a whole show. We could do a whole season of Calhoun shows.
I feel like that's more of like it's like a sort of prestige drama.
It's a comic interlude, it's a comic interlude. It is one of the most devastating. It is one of the most consequential events in American history. But we're not even going to talk about it now,
I figure it would be something like if it was like shot and produced like the show like White Lotus or something, where it's just gaudy, everyone is sort of hateable and biting social commentary. HBO should pick this up, but point being, Jackson and Calhoun don't really like each other, also because of this whole nullification crisis thing, and Calhoun becomes a senator once more, where he does his orator spiel best. And the issue that we're talking about for this particular speech is the question of slavery in the District of Columbia. So how does this particular, I guess, region?
This is one of these cases where, because it's a federal district. Okay, so the main issue, because I mean, it's pretty settled that there's by the letter of the Constitution, slavery is pretty explicitly enshrined, if not in federal law. It is pretty enshrined in the 10th Amendment, the ability of states to make their own laws. Okay. And so, but what's not left, what's not really clearly adjudicated, and this is like John C. Calhoun's audit the government issue. Like over the course of his entire career, like he brings this up over and over again. It's one of his favorite rhetorical gambits is to interrupt. And usually the way Calhoun likes to do this is he will interrupt some incredibly important debate on some time sensitive debate on some other issue with an abstract discourse on the legality of federal adjudication of slavery in lands that are directly governed by the federal government. So that's going to be the territories in the District of Columbia. And the district, go ahead.
One of the overall legacies of Calhoun is sort of he sometimes gets unfairly targeted for creating the filibuster in its sort of nascent form. I
mean, he does the shit out of that.
Yeah, but that's more like guy stands on stage and hogs the platform for so long, and the vice president allows for it to happen.
Yeah. He does it for so long. At one point, he collapses. He just falls
Yeah.
over. But the you know the other like sort of important context here is that the slavery issue has become the immediate concept, the immediate things that bring about this speech are the issue of slavery and what we're going to do with slavery in the District of Columbia. And it's a political football is what it is. But also the Quakers and the Yankees, and you're asking about what is the state of, by 1837, the abolitionist faction, and it's the same jokers, it's the same people, more or less the children, the sons of the same people that did the Hartford Convention, which we didn't talk about, but let's not bother going back and grab it because we're running long already.
Sure.
But they are, you know, this sort of dynastic New England Yankee, what, you know, what people think of as like Puritan Yankee bullshit. But, you know, I'm all over the place saying that's not necessarily what's happened, but that faction is congealed around, and they're usually, they're not even really politicians. They're like newspaper owners and lawyers and clerks and that sort of thing. But they have congealed around this character of William Lloyd Garrison, who has this newspaper that he can use to spread his bilious filth everywhere in the country. And Calhoun is always doing things to try and shut him down. Like he tries to use the federal mail system to ban what he refers to as libelous materials and so on and so forth.
But I think you have to appreciate that, you know, these sort of puritanical fixations are not, you know, they're not just one single issue, you know, that being abolitionism. It's also a grab bag of other like social movements, you know,
absolutely,
vegetarianism, socialism, feminism,
absolutely. But I mean, the keystone issue, because like all of like these other, like, you know, the multi-dimensional matrix of American politics in the 19th century has been like, there's no bank anymore. Jackson's gone. Tariffs are pretty much decided. We're relatively at peace. There's no major geopolitical obstacles to like deal with. And so by far the main issue that's on people's minds is, what are we going to do about all this fucking slavery, man? And what are we going to do? What are we going to do about those meddling Yankees? What are we going to do about those degenerate aristocrats?
Actually, in all fairness to this particular speech, so the first report that I have, the guy who presents 2 petitions from his constituents calling upon Congress to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia is Senator John Tipton of Indiana.
Yeah.
Is this like, I believe that John Quincy Adams was, you know, throwing petitions. Was this just some sort of like proxy, like, hey John, can you like put a petition
It's
in
it's a genuinely felt, genuinely understood thing. And Indiana is one of these newer states, and it's like sort of, it's very Western in orientation. And in Indiana, they're doing what, family farming is generally what they're doing. And this is like the beginning of like white American labor activism. Because they're concerned about things like the slave labor depressing agricultural wages.
Well, this is free soilers, right? Trying to ensure that the new lands opened up out west aren't immediately claimed by, you know, syndicates of planters who, you know, buy up all of the good land and then employ slaves
to clear it.
Employ, but, you know, use slave labor.
And that's a very big thing. Okay. And so like what sort of happened here in 1837 is this issue of slavery in DC, which is like touches Calhoun's tism, because the abstraction of it keeps him up at night. You know, he paces back and forth at night, thinking about these abstractions. What are we going to do about what are we going to do about the particulars of governance in federal territories? He's really like that. He's kind of a pedant, but he's very eloquent, and people always respect his integrity is what they do. But Garrison, who has become by this time, and by this time, there's this kind of shitposty war between low-level like academics and preachers, and like who is that character that I can't stand? George Fitzhugh is always going up in the North and like antagonizing the abolitionists and getting his name in the newspaper, and like really what presents this increasingly cultural and politically polarized environment. And Garrison has whipped up a frenzy over this DC thing, and like a flurry of demands have been petitioned to immediately abolish slavery in the District of Columbia. And we get this moment where on February 6th of 1837, the senator from South Carolina rises to the floor and declares that he's fucking had enough. And this comes down to us as the speech on the reception of abolition petitions.
So the first portion is, briefly, look, this is just, you guys keep on saying these abusive petitions, to abuse us and to put us down. And to be frank, I don't really like it very much.
Well,
And we don't really even need to hear them. Like, as I told, Senator from Pennsylvania, like, even if you do acquiesce, even if we do hear him out, what are we gonna do? The federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over the entirety of the United States to abolish the institution of slavery.
Right. Okay.
Constitutionally.
Let's set the stage here a little bit. So it's February, so it's cold. It's cold and damp and rainy in Washington, D.C. Everybody's house is drafty. If you've ever been in D.C. in the winter, it's cold and rainy as fuck. And the only real show in town at the time is the Senate. And every day in the morning, all the ladies will get dressed up in their petticoats, and all the dapper young men will get dressed up in their broadcloth, and they'll go down and they'll try to get a space in the speaking gallery just to see what's going on. And this is not like Calhoun is. I mean, he's in his prime. This is the peak of the Great Triumvirate. But they're doing a lot of speaking. They do a lot of speaking, and this is not an incident that is one of them that is precipitated by rumor that everyone knows is coming. This is one of his intrusions on the day-to-day operation of the Senate. There are other ones where, like, there's the famous multi-day rhetorical feud between William C. Preston and Daniel Webster that John C. Calhoun, as vice president, has to sit there and adjudicate. And at one point he comes down out of his neutrality and he's passing notes to Preston. And then shortly thereafter, he can't stand it anymore. And he resigns the vice presidency and has the South Carolina governor reinstate him as senator just so he can go shitpost at Daniel Webster. And they have these incredible multi-day rhetorical duels with these breathless crowds. But that's not how it works today. It's cold and rainy. And the Senate is going about more or less its regular duties. And one of these petitions come in, and Calhoun's just finally had enough. Just to give you a taste of the rhetoric here. Okay, I'm going to read.
Are you going to put on the full accent?
Well, I don't quite know. Don't quite know what they sounded like. It's real difficult to accurately, because they might have sounded more British than we do. They might have been a little more rhotic than I actually am. But in all likelihood, John C. Calhoun was one of the early people that kind of sounded like this. And he rises, and the way they would have stood is very dramatic. There's a speaking posture, with your hand out in front of you, your paper, if your notes that you've taken are going to be in your other hand. You're going to arch your back a certain way to project your voice and to strike an elegant pose. And he begins, and this is how the business.
I think I found a good picture of it.
Yeah, flash it. And this is how these proceedings begin. The senator rises. He's recognized. He'll be recognized. The president pro temp of the Senate will recognize the senator from South Carolina, Mr. Calhoun, and he'll stand up and everybody will go breathless. The ladies will start fanning themselves because Calhoun is about to speak, and you can tell by the look in his face that it's gonna be a banger. Okay.
I think you've hyped him up enough.
Yeah, okay. And he says, if the time of the Senate permitted, I would feel it my duty to call for the reading of the mass of petitions on the table, in order that we might know what language they hold towards the slaveholding states and their institutions. But as it will not, I have selected indiscriminately from the pile 2 from those in manuscript, and the other from the printed, and without knowing their contents, will call for the reading of them, so that we may judge by them of the character of the whole, And so, like, you can already, like, this is, the rhetorical flourish is here incredible. He's bullshitting. Okay, he's lying.
Is he though? I feel like he knows that these aren't particularly nice petitions.
Yeah.
He's setting them up for an insult. It's
like,
he's daring them to say something mean, and he gets to chastise them for being abusive to the Senate and disrespectful.
Yeah, we all know where this is going. Like, it is like, no, but he's feigning surprise. Yeah, he's feigning surprise here. He's like, but he knows he's interrupting everything. Thomas Hart Benton is over there in his chair fuming. Henry Clay is drunk and he's about to get up and shoot because they're doing something else. And he's, if the time of the Senate permitted, I would feel it to be my duty to call for the reading of the mass of petitions on the table. So he's like, as a principled statesman, I do think we should sit here and read all of them. But since we can't, I'm just going to reach my hand in this hat and see which ones I pull out. That's the rhetorical character. And this is whenever I taught this speech, I used to teach this speech. This was my day on political rhetoric. I would break it down into 8 sections. And then there's the section where he feigns this is a beautifully classic formula. There's a section where he feigns indignation, and then the theory heavy part. What do you think about pathos, logos, or what is the other one? God, ethos, pathos, logos.
Ethos.
He begins on pathos because he's got a crowd to please. And then before everybody gets bored with listening to him, then he slides into the ethos, and then he gets into what it was, the section, the structural section of it is indignation, legal formalism. Then there's the prophetic apocalyptic section, the didactic and paternalistic section, the calm pragmatic section, and then the end, which is the elegaic section. And what I just read from this, the very beginning. So he sets the tone by very seriously dramatizing moral Northern petitions as a moral invasion. It's a general crusade against this governing body itself. We have important things to do, and we're compelled by our nature as responsible statesmen to drop what we're doing and listen to your Yankee bitching. Is what he says. And so the rhetorical frame is that of the besieged of a besieged situation, but it's also one of Northern imposition upon the good Southern people who are just trying to conduct the business of government. Okay, it's this beautiful speech in this sense. It's a wonderful opening. And then he rolls into the second section. He goes, it's important to read this, where he says, I do not belong. And then we're getting third person narration. So I do not belong, Mr. C. And this is one of his great quotes. I do not belong, said Mr. C, to the school which holds that aggression is to be met with concession. Mine is the opposite creed, which teaches that encroachments must be met at the beginning, and that those who act upon the opposite principle are prepared to become slaves. In this case, in particular, I hold concession or compromise to be fatal. If we concede an inch, concession would follow concession, compromise would follow compromise, until our ranks would be so broken that effectual resistance would be impossible. We must meet the enemy on the frontier with a fixed determination of maintaining our position at every hazard. And so what is this? He's now adopting the role of the bombastic Southern cavalier. He says, you cannot do this to a Southern aristocrat. Well, you have challenged my honor, and I will meet you right here.
Or, well, it sounds like he was coming out in the defensive, and then now he's going for the jugular on the offensive.
Well, this is what he
Like,
says. He frames this speech as though this is a speech that he doesn't want to have to make, but that you have chosen the ground here to fight. I have to come out and meet you because on this particular issue, it is in the interest of both the Southern people and the United States government that we put this to bed once and for all, and what he's doing is he's using military, and this is why I'm not really convinced that there's any real change in the character of John C. Calhoun. He evolves he's always a nationalist. He's always a nationalist, but he evolves in his internal perception of how he should apply those principles. Which is why I continue to be a Calhounite, because that's sort of what I believe. I have a constantly evolving way of applying the exact same principles. But if you look at what he's doing here, he's fusing the moral vocabulary of liberty, So he's calling on he's drawing from the rich tradition of really, down to Thomas Paine, the crisis. So he's like, this is what the crisis has been engendered here. And the moral vocabulary of liberty, and his argument against this concession is martial. It's metaphorical. We are going to ride out to meet you, and it's totalizing and absolutist. This issue is so damn important. To yield on it, we would ourselves become slaves. And then he's defining freedom as the power to preserve domination in this very masculinist way. It's a beautiful argument,
well, he says, was it like this incendiary spirit has infected the North, and I'm here to burn it out.
Yeah. And Calhoun will never go quite this far, but he stops just short of calling them British agents, is what he's doing. Okay. And then the third section that we move into is this is the jurisdiction argument. And this is when he pulls out his card, the abstract legality, the legalese that he's been banging on about since pretty much 1817, which is this question of, can the federal government even do this? Because it was consent to receive these insulting positions, he says. And the next demand will be that they are referred to committee in order that they might be deliberated and acted upon. At the last session, we were modestly asked to receive them simply to lay on the table without any view of ulterior action. I then told the senator from Pennsylvania, and that's future President James Buchanan, who strongly urged that course in the Senate, that it was a position that could not be maintained, as the argument in favor of acting on the petitions, if we were bound to receive, could not be resisted. The subject is beyond the jurisdiction of Congress. They have no right to touch it in any shape or form, or to make it subject of deliberation or discussion. So the Constitution is very clear on this, and it's a part of the Constitution you can't change. Okay, we've decided this a long time ago. The federal government is not. He says, the states are able. And I'll finish the quote. In opposition to this view, it is urged that Congress is bound by the Constitution to receive petitions in every case and on every subject, whether within its constitutional competency or not. I hold the doctrine to be absurd and do solemnly believe that it would be as easy to prove that it has the right to abolish slavery as that it is bound to receive petitions for that purpose. And so look what he's doing is he's saying,
there are two different particular issues that he's talking about. One is the First Amendment issue of, the right for these petitions to be heard. And then the second is the constitutionality of slavery.
Yeah.
And the first one is, you have the First Amendment to petition your government, but if we don't want to hear them, that's our right too. And then the second is, we already have, the constitutionality of slavery has already been ironed out in the Constitution, and it's a state's issue.
You can go. This is the claim right here. In Massachusetts, you can abolish slavery. In South Carolina, you can protect slavery. But according to the language in the Constitution, the federal government does not have the ability to the federal government does not have the authority to ban slavery, because okay, what happens? This is like, he's constantly worried about these legal loopholes, and this issue does blow up 15 years later. What happens if a Southerner who owns a slave brings one into the territories? Under what jurisdiction is this governed? Okay, is the question. And then on the other hand, we have this issue of the First Amendment issues go way back. It's like, okay, yeah, petitions are good and petitions are quite powerful, but do we have to sit here and waste time receiving petitions on this useless bullshit that I have determined positively, and so have my colleagues, that we are not allowed to adjudicate? And what he's really doing here is a kind of he's doing a very
you abuse us, and there's nothing that can be done constitutionally to address your concerns. So it's just abuse.
There's no substance to it, so it is just abuse. And what he's really, and again, that Calvinist background that I'm always talking about, he's doing a thing we would call constitutional literalism, and it actually, in this section, it functions as an early nullification logic that's applied to Congress itself. Because what he's doing is he's denying the reception of petitions. He cuts the chain of democratic redress, is the sort of what he's doing here, and he's anticipating modern, what we call procedural sovereignty today arguments, which is that the legitimacy of these petitions doesn't depend on moral content, but on it's rather on jurisdictional boundary. Even if I agreed with you, I couldn't do anything. And then he rapidly transitions into his sort of prophetic mode, where he makes this case where he says, as widely as this incendiary spirit has spread, he's referring to Garrison now. He very rarely refers to Garrison by name, because he's participating in the Southern aristocrats, like pejorative they. Okay, so like in the language, in the internal language of the Southern upper class, referring to somebody by a name, by their name indicates friendliness and colleaguery. But if you refer to them as them or they or something like that, like Robert E. Lee, for instance, would famously during the war, he would only refer to Yankees as those people. Okay, so like refusing to acknowledge the name of Garrison is
incendiary spirit.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And he says, as widely as this incendiary spirit is spread, it has not yet infected this body. And at this point, he's pointing down at the floor of Congress. We say, we're better than that here, or the great mass of the intelligent and business portion of the North. He said, this has not even infected the minds of most Northerners. This is just a few bad apples. But unless it be speedily stopped, it will spread and work upwards till it brings the two great sections of the Union into deadly conflict. And that's a reference to Shakespeare right there. Oh, it's a reference to the Richard III. The one in deadly hate against the other. This is not a new impression with me. Several years since, in a discussion with one of the senators from Massachusetts, the Honorable Mr. Webster, before this fell spirit had showed itself, I then predicted that the doctrine of the proclamation and of the force bill, this government had a right in the last resort to determine the extent of its own powers. This means the government reserves this right to say that it can't govern that and enforce it at the point of the bayonet. No distant day aroused the dormant spirit of abolitionism. By the necessary course of events, if left to themselves, we must become finally two people. It is impossible under the deadly hatred which must spring up between the two great sections, if the present causes are permitted to operate unchecked, that we should continue under the same political system. The conflicting elements would burst the Union asunder as powerful as are the links which hold it together. Abolition and the Union cannot coexist. As the friend of the Union, I openly proclaim it, and the sooner it is known, the better. And so, what he's doing here, he's falling back on an American,
He's saying that you're the problem, you're tearing us apart.
Yeah.
And
right. In a sense, in with reference, this is the crescendo of the speech. Okay, so this is like he's been going for a while, and he's been building
it's
up
also
pressure.
Roughly the midpoint.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. He's structured sort of in a balanced way, and this is his money shot section. Okay, and again, he's already dropped banger after banger. I do not belong to the school which holds aggression is to be met with concession. That's one of his all-time bangers. Okay, and then another of his all-time bangers gets dropped right here. Abolition and the Union cannot coexist, and that's the mic drop moment in this speech. But now what he has to do, and what he's embedding this in this larger, the growing prophecy of this narrative, that it's not a political movement, but it's an inevitable contagion. He's using the language of the miasma theory of public health. It's an invisible contagion arising out of the land itself from federal overreach. The land itself will poison and die. He's situating himself as this Cassandra-like figure and as an American patriot.
I think you're having a good time, I guess, pontificating on and getting to the theatrics of Calhoun.
Yeah.
But is this how people would have actually seen it?
Yes.
Or yeah.
Well, at least the immediate audience would have.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a game of telephone. It gets interpreted slightly differently the further away from the source you get. But in the immediate context of the room he is in, the audience he is speaking to, and the gathered crowd that is watching him, they are, by contemporary standards, overwhelmingly literate, and they are able to pick up every little small because he's also very good at this. Like I'm reading all of this into it just as I go along. They are able to read incredible granularities into the semantics of political speech that we have lost the ability to do today. And this is the section that he rolls into next. He's done his mic drop, and then he makes his mistake. He doesn't make this mistake in the context of what he's immediately referring to, but in terms of eternity, this is the heel on which John C. Calhoun's entire reputation has turned. And so I'll do this one whole.
Are you talking about was it 5?
This is in my section 5.
Okay, gotcha.
He says, "We of the South cannot surrender our institutions," which is a polite word for slavery, "to maintain the existing relations between the two races inhabiting that section of the South is indispensable to the peace and the happiness of both," by which he means both black and white Southerners. "It cannot be subverted without drenching the country in blood and extirpating one or the other of the races. Be it good or bad, it has grown up within our society." And there's that garden metaphor again. He's doing the Jeffersonian garden thing. Be it good or bad, it has grown up with our society and institutions and is so interwoven with them that to destroy it would be to destroy us as a people. But let me not be understood as admitting, even by implication, that the existing relations between the two races in the slave-holding states is an evil. Far otherwise, I hold it to be a good, as it has thus far proved itself to be both, will continue to prove so, if not disturbed by the fell spirit of abolition. I appeal to facts. Never before has the black race of Central Africa, from the dawn of history to the present day, attained a condition so civilized and so improved, not only physically, but morally and intellectually. It came along us in a low degraded, this is probably a mistranscription. It came along to us in a low, degraded, and savage condition. And in the course of a few generations, it has grown up under the fostering care of our institutions, as reviled as they have been, to its present comparative civilized condition. And this is the positive good moment. Okay, this is the infamous positive good moment. And this also reflects an interesting shift in rhetoric about slavery around this time. Whereas in the past, slavery had mostly been appealed to as an economic condition. Now that the economic condition of the tariff has been settled, we're starting to look for moral. And this is, and remember, the United States as a whole is becoming more moral and more Christian. And so we start seeking Christian we start seeking Christian justifications, moral justifications, because economics is more or less settled. We only have the moral ground on which we can fight now. So we're saying, not only is this a good, not only is this a positive good, it's under the care of our care and tutelage in our garden. These people have improved themselves beyond their wildest recognition, their wildest comprehension. We could not imagine. No Negro in Africa could imagine himself as happy as one of our Negroes in slavery. We have improved the species, is what he's saying. But
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that in this first report, senator from Virginia actually interjects that he's very uncomfortable with this line of reasoning, believing that it's all fine. He's hasty to, I guess, make grand pronouncements in the abstract, and he's not willing to actually make a comment in you know in the in the way that things are as they stand in practice. And Calhoun, he he isn't into theoretics, or he isn't really into theory. He is saying this is what it looks like on the ground, and he does ruffle a whole lot of feathers this way.
Yeah, he comes out of the fight now. Again, he's being.
It's not like mere abstract apologetics. It's saying that it's a good thing, and
Yeah.
I'm not apologizing for it.
Yeah, this is a very forceful section, but there is some context that gets missed. He says what he is. These are true things. He is wielding racial hierarchy positing some time in the future when these people may be civilized enough to be free. So there's a teleological process that's involved here. But he says, the fostering care of our institutions it's a euphemism for domination, but it transforms coercion into moral uplift. Is like what a lot of people would say about it. And this does become, and from the moment this is uttered, this moment becomes the meme moment for Southern pro-slavery ideology from this point on up until the beginning of the Civil War. But there's a thing that gets missed somewhat because, these granularities, the little foibles and the eddies of politics that are lost on us now. He's not, but now the argument with the Virginia is wiffly wobbly. They're a hesitating friend of the revolution in the Southern Constellation at this point in time, because Virginia's actually, this is probably the most impoverished Virginia has ever been at any time in its history, because cotton and tobacco cultivation is very rough on soil. It depletes soil rapidly. And unlike South Carolina, which has the PD River, and unlike the Alabama, which has the Black Belt, and unlike Mississippi and Louisiana, which have the Mississippi River that floods and rejuvenates the land, Virginia's been there.
They just have these sandy loam hills.
Yeah.
That don't automatically regenerate. Nutrients, and they stripped the soil of everything from high intensity tobacco.
Yeah. I mean, it's generally the very thing that makes Virginia good for growing tobacco makes it not very good for growing cotton. So that really fine, bright leaf Virginia tobacco that everybody talks about, that's literally comes from the soil that it's grown in, not really being very good. And you get this mellow, low nicotine, much lighter colored product at the end.
Well, the way I've experimented with tobacco is that it hates thicker soil, and the end product isn't very good if you have nutrient dense or very nutrient dense soil anyways.
Right.
It's just too heavy.
Right. Yeah. There's too much going on in there.
And the early seedlings need, they're very delicate, and they need, more loose soil than a lot of other different regions actually have. So that's probably.
And it was the other famous thing is shade grown Connecticut, so it's out of the sun, so it's a little bit starved, and then The cigar tobaccos are all grown down in that volcanic soil that's not very,
We're talking
not very
about like
nutrient rich.
Nicaragua.
Yeah, like,
Like
well, it
very,
would have
very
been
heavy.
it would have been mostly Cuba at the time, but like tropical rainforest is famously not good soil for growing things in. But yeah, back to Calhoun. There is the Virginia controversies. The Virginians they're having one of these periods where they're waffling on slavery because they're not really growing cotton very well anymore. They're trying to transition to wheat agriculture, which is far less labor intensive, and they don't need their slaves as much anymore. The only thing slavery is really doing, and Virginia also is the only southern state at this point that's really started to develop its own domestic manufacturing sector. But the only thing slavery is really doing for Virginians, and so Virginia can't like fucking get on its fucking high horse and ride around and act like, well, we was done with slavery. That's not necessarily true because they are still growing cotton. But the way they're using slaves is they're selling them into the gold rush of the lower colonies, of the lower southern states in what's called the Second Middle Passage, and with the cash monies that they're getting for these sales, they're buying fertilizers and guanos to artificially reinvigorate their soils, but still, like Virginia is not as ideologically committed to either the Southern Project or to the Slavery Project as they're kind of like Virginia is classically the weather vane state. It goes one way sometimes, it goes other ways the other times. Recently, I think it was the 1820s, Virginia had an internal abolitionist movement. So it was the only really elaborate abolitionist movement inside a southern state. So he's like, that's the senator from Virginia, like kind of feeling steamrolled by this like fucking hillbilly from South Carolina. And he says, wait, the Cavaliers of Virginia have to get their word in, doing you don't quite speak for all of us. But the missing granularity here is that Calhoun is making a reference here, okay? And he's referencing topical politics, and he says, be it good or bad, it has grown up with our society and is so interwoven with them, to maintain the existing relations between the races inhabiting that section of the Union. It's indispensable to peace and happiness of both. Can't be subverted without drenching the country in blood and extirpating one of the other races. So what he's referring to here is this process by which the northern states are, and Massachusetts is not the one that does this. I can't remember which one.
That's the next paragraph down here where it gets into, you have gotten very, very rich by the tariffs artificially propping up industry and propping up all these stock jobber securities.
I love that phrase, stock jobber.
And, we've had to extract wealth other ways. And, you've extracted so much money from us from these tariffs. And you guys are just, trying to knock us down even more from your very, very high horse.
You've got this bee in your bonnet about this shit. But then there's also this other, because it's a relatively unspoken, but it's a reference that is there. It's in the context of the contemporary politics. What these northern states have also started doing, though, Massachusetts didn't, because Massachusetts are ride or dies. They're real ride or dies. But it's in the grain growing states that are starting to fill up with German immigrants. Germans don't really feel like that. The Germans and the Yankees that move out, they don't really feel like they have a dog in this fight. They're not big fans of slavery. They outlaw slavery because they don't want, not really on moral grounds, but rather on practical grounds, because they don't want slaves. They don't want slaves in their state.
They don't want slaves working in whatever factories.
Right. Yeah. Right. And they're even going further than that, and they're banning the entry of freed blacks into the northern states. And so, I can't remember which ones had done it, but at the time, at the very moment this speech is given, there is legislation working its way through the Indiana state government that's going to ban free blacks from entering the state to protect, nominally to protect white wages. But he's making this because this is the situation we have down here in the fucking South. And if we turn these people loose, as you're insisting that we do, who's gonna take them? You know, where are they gonna go? They don't have any support network. He's like, oh, you the free, you, like, turn them. If we're gonna free the slaves, we got to have a plan for weaning these people off slavery. And we're not the historical conditions that we have on the ground here. You know, this is referring to the Nat Turner rebellion and these other these other slave uprisings that have happened. It's like we're not going to stop keeping slaves, and we know for a fact that having large numbers of these freed blacks lying around causes them to incite violence against us. So he's like, you're putting us in a really terrible situation here, which is that you're demanding that we abolish slavery. But on the other hand, you're not going to let them come to your state. So we have to abolish slavery. And then we also have to sit here with this legacy of this domination, you know, and it's like, and besides, they're actually doing pretty well. This is just how it is, man. Well, given all of the circumstances available to us, this is a positive good, you know?
Well, in terms of what, I guess, like, I just know that if any of the less astute, sort of left wingers of today, progressives, take a look at this, they will be abhorred by the language of uplifting the black race of Central Africa, and they'll even they'll also balk at this next portion, which is on, I guess, Southern paternalism as a concept, and how perverted it is that Calhoun essentially says that the South has solved its class warfare question with paternalism over.
He's kind of getting there. That argument is not going to be articulated fully until James Henry Hammond gives the mudsill theory.
Yeah, and he also sort of makes this very strange argument that the South is significantly more, I guess, democratic than the North because
it certainly is. This is true
because they've already solved, who's gonna be the laboring classes, who's going to actually run things. All right, now that we know who's going to run things, and there isn't that lingering question, we can have a fully democratic, political economy.
By his own understanding of democracy, that is true. Okay. He has not lost me yet in this speech. This is the positive good claim is the one that's used to cast his name blackly to strip his name from everywhere, that to tear all of his statues down. This is the statement that did it. This is where he steps on the rake and and crosses the woke mob of the year 2010.
There's also the sort of opposite direction where the same senator from Virginia says, are you invoking, Robert Filmer, patriarcha arguments?
Yeah.
And Calhoun says, no, like, this is not an argument for, I guess, a hierarchy, a very hierarchical vision of politics and economics and social relations between, individuals and races. This is just how it is on the ground, pragmatically.
Yeah.
It's also a rabid rejection of sort of absolutism.
Yeah. It's a very elegant and slightly convoluted. And again, he's making this. He's performing this in front of a live audience, and so he is manipulating his audience, and he is attempting to. This is a duel. This is a fencing duel, and there are consequences. Who the people think win the debate is somewhat important, if not in terms of how the law is, because nobody really thinks this is going to be solved right here. But it is important with respect to your social prestige and your relative standing in Congress. But right here, this is the section. This is what he refers to the statement of Southern exceptionalism. This really is the meat of his argument, and he is starting to tease what's going to develop into the into the mudsill theory. but he doesn't quite get there. He's missing some determinacy that James Henry Handman will gleefully add about a decade later. But this is what he says here. He says the existing relation between the two races in the South, against which these blind fanatics are waging war. He says they're blind. They don't even know what they're doing. Forms the most solid and durable foundation on which to rear free and stable political institutions. Actually, the condition of society in the South exempts us from the disorders and dangers resulting from this conflict. But this is the conflict between labor and capital. He's actually sort of intimating the Marxism hasn't even been invented yet, but he's saying that this is actually our bulwark against Marxism and that wild ass shit all these Europeans are doing, because we don't have the same issues as you do. There is no clear determinant between what is labor and what is capital in your political system, and it makes yours a mess. We have a clear demarcation, so everybody knows where it's at. So he says the condition of society in the South exempts us from the disorders and dangers resulting from this conflict, which explains why it is that the political condition of the slaveholding South has been so much more stable and quiet than those in the North. He's always just like, get your own shit in order before you come after us. And so what he's doing is now
isn't this not entirely true though, because there is still a white underclass, and the accrual of wealth is,
you would have to go read. There's a very good book on this called The Mind of the South that really rather persuasively argues, and this is whenever they call the South, when they call the right wing the neo-Confederates today, this is what they're, and one of the things the leftists will accuse us doing is using this specter of white supremacy to paste over class distinctions. And that, what we're willing to do is sort of huckster around and pretend that our poor cousins are admitted to the universal brotherhood of the white man, and that they're not actually any poorer or any worse than us, and that we don't really have class. He's participating in the Southern myth that we don't have class relations. We've just got free and slaves. This is like, the planters may not even. This is, but it's because he fucks this up sometimes. At times he will claim to be an aristocrat, and at other times he'll claim we don't have classes in the South.
How so? Would there be something of an argument that there's something of a cartel of, I guess, creditors who, for all intents and purposes, most of these plantations owe their lines of credit to, in the form of sort of like a proto big agriculture sort of network.
That is like, this is one of the reasons this speech is interesting, is because it is at the very last moment before that becomes the case. Okay, so this is in February of 1837. The panic of 1837 and the total collapse of the American banknote market is what ultimately permanentizes that condition of the planters themselves as debtors to their cotton factors, and then ultimately their British creditors. It hasn't quite gotten there yet, but like if that is the earthquake that sets the United States inevitably on the road to civil war, the building is already shaking. It's shaking, but it's not shaking in a way that anybody can really feel it yet. So this is a relatively good faith argument at this point. There's no reason to believe anybody. I mean, they're doing rhetorical bullshit, but they do really believe the positions they're holding.
So you're saying there is still a significant amount of upward mobility.
Yes.
And he's not entirely bullshitting about, I guess, class dynamics.
Yeah, he's not entirely there.
Class is like still muddy enough.
Yeah. But you're literally, this is coming out of the Jacksonian era. The American currency is collapsing, and the economic conditions that sort of render us prisoners of British finance are in motion. The thing is dead, but the body is still twitching, basically. And then, well, you were going to say something?
Yeah. We still have, I guess we glossed over a few of the apocalyptic predictions.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah. What are they?
okay. So I'm trying to find it here. He, I'm trying to find the line where he says that you know, civil war will be the North will treat us nastier than any foreign enemy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I'm trying to find that line. Um, but yeah, I'm seeing more of, what would you even do with these African slaves?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, who's going to be the overseer? Um, you're going to keep them out of your like Yankee stronghold with like bayonets and civil magistrates.
Yeah.
Um, let's see.
Yeah. So he's filling in that context that I just sort of explained. But yeah, I mean, and this is the thing about Calhoun. This is why he's one of the most powerful senators, is because when he starts making predictions, he tends to be right. Okay, he's not dumb. They look rough and they're snaggletooth and and they're not very healthy. They're hard living, not very healthy men, but they are incredibly brilliant, and they take their job as representatives, as members of the United States Congress, sacrosanct. And they're doing their best job. And he is one of these people who's like, when he says something's going to happen, it usually does. So
So he wraps up his speech with what are essentially pleas for, let's not hear out these petitions. Let's, mind our own business.
yeah,
We want, union, not abolition. And this is all in good faith.
yeah, and look,
From your brothers in the South.
yeah, and he says, I hold, it says, oh no, it says, the closing. He says, all we want is concert. Lay aside all party differences and unite with zeal and energy in repelling approaching dangers. Let there be concert of action, and we shall find ample means of security without resorting to secession or disunion. But then he does the Columbo. Well, just one more thing, One thing alarms me: the eager pursuit of gain, which overspreads the land, and which absorbs every faculty of the mind and every feeling of the heart. There is a trouble in the land. Of all passions, avarice is the most blind and compromising, the last to see and first to yield to danger. I dare not hope that anything I can say will arouse the South to a due sense of danger. I fear it is beyond the power of mortal voice to awaken it in time for from the fatal security into which it has fallen. So this is, his end. He's like, I do believe he's hamming up the Southern thing. He's hamming up the Moonlight Magnolias thing.
Peaceful or level heads will prevail.
Yeah.
I trust the plan. Don't listen to Weber, or I'm sorry, and don't listen to Garrison.
Yeah.
You know,
Webster is interesting, is that Webster chooses his battles. Webster is not nearly as much of an abolitionist as Garrison is.
well,
So
my impression was that John Quincy Adams, his former president,
yeah,
as like VP, was more of the rabble rouser
yeah.
of the time. And maybe we can start getting into like closing up and getting into I guess the immediate aftermath of this.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do. So yeah, if you remember the very narrow context here is that so many of these, Garrison is doing such a good job of getting these literally flooding Congress with these petitions, and they don't have computers and everything like that. So this is all much more the argument that Calhoun is making. And really, he's not just making this. The case he's making is that we physically can't handle this bullshit. But also, he is very concerned about what he believes is the imminent rupture of the of the union, and he's just like he's doing everything he can to tamp down on this abolitionist sentiment. And the narrow case is what's happening. These petitions are being sent, okay, and what eventually, and he's making this long. Because Calhoun because he's in Congress forever. I mean, it's his damn job. It's what he does. It's his career, And so what he's capable of doing and what the Senate is capable of doing in ways that the House of Representatives may not necessarily be capable of doing is that he can build cases very slowly over the course of weeks and months, and in some cases even years, where he just like he will he'll get up and he'll speak for a few minutes and he'll sit back down, and then years later, because everybody's keeping notes, years later he'll refer back to these comments and be like, I've been saying this for a long time, and use that to sort of buttress the weight of his argument. But what he's eventually angling towards here is a ban on, or is a ban on the gag rule. The infamous gag rule is a ban on the discussion of slavery in Congress. Certainly, and it includes things like attaching it as a rider to another bill. This is the overall case is that it's like there's no double indemnity here, man. This is in the federal Constitution. We've all decided the federal Constitution doesn't have so all you're doing is rabble rousing, and you're going to get us involved in a civil war. So it's actually, this speech is not protected by the First Amendment, is quite literally what he's saying. He's like, we don't have any the security of the state trumps is the one exception to the First Amendment. And we can actually ban all discussion of this because it's just so decided, this is not good for us. It's not good for anything. So yeah, they try to force the gag rule. And this is an early shot in the long running gag rule argument is what's going on.
Gotcha. And this gag, well, he was tinkering around with this since like 36. But
yeah, he's tried to do this. Yeah, he's tried to do this a bunch of times.
And gets the first like gag order or gag rule in like I think May.
Yeah,
and it lasts for about 8 years.
Yeah.
But I don't think that what was it? I don't think it really, how do you say, did it actually have the effect that he wanted it to?
It's not actually totally clear by the time the gag order comes around. It's like sort of like, okay, you're you're bleeding, and the only bandage you have is a bandage that you've already put on another place where you're bleeding, and if you pull that bandage off, you'll start bleeding again. This is Calhoun's like sort of wilderness period in a lot of ways, because he's in large measure after 1832, he abandons his president. He runs for president one more time. But I mean, he is sort of this Luciferian figure in Congress, because like everyone more or less understands that his defense of South Carolina and nullification under the nullification conditions have really dented his national star. He had formerly been one of the most popular senators, even in the North. His northern base of power had by this point shrunk to pretty much just New York State, and so he is not he has gone from being a major universally powerful statesman to being only a regionally powerful statesman, but he does speak collectively for that region. So like his range has been diminished somewhat. And he is like, people talk about this shift that occurs in the way he thinks about things. Does John C. Calhoun ever abandon the idea of the internal market? Does he ever abandon the idea of the tariff? I don't think he actually does, but he does lose here. So what the idea that he loses here is his concept of a republic of sentiment, which is that in the past, he had believed that if we get these tariffs and if we build all of this infrastructure, and if we develop these internal markets and get off the British tit, that all of these cultural issues that are arising between us, these concepts of the crisis, we can plaster over those by making it easy, by increasing the information and commodity velocity between the various regions, until they get networked so densely that these sectional disputes actually fall away, and we become so enmeshed with one another that we can't do a civil war. That's what the younger idealistic John C. Calhoun believed. When he moves to the point where he is, and it's not really clear if he really believes that he's not gagging the First Amendment with his words. He certainly believes that he has to do it at this point, and I think does he get what he wants in the narrow sense? Yes. Is he also aware that his dream of a truly sectionally united states is possible? No, he's aware that this is going to inflame the sectional divide, and probably at this point he becomes increasingly gloomy from this point on, and that's the context in which he starts really composing and really putting together the document that becomes Disquisition on Government.
And and I guess you sort of laid the groundwork for, Calhoun alienates his northern allies.
Yeah.
And then eventually, Calhoun retires, or he dies in 1850.
1850.
And
He
then
never retired. He died in
then,
Washington, D.C.
yeah, and then around the same time, both Clay and Webster, former sort of power broker allies
Yeah.
against the Democratic Party. Well, kind of sectional power brokers die, and where does that actually lead?
Yeah. So
Who actually becomes the power brokers in like 1850 when they die?
though nobody really. That's good because, like, again, these people had been such giants. And the first real slavery crisis occurs with the Missouri Compromise in 1817, and all of them are already in Congress. Okay, so like they are the generation. These three persons in particular are the three. Because these three exist, because these three powerful pillars of integrity and democracy, whatever else their qualities are, because they exist. It's somewhat permissible for the underlings to get a little wild, as long as dad stays calm, the kids can, the kids can run wild. With I think 1850, I think all three of them are either dead or out of, all three of them. Calhoun famously, he's already dying, and he comes out to make a case. He's led up to the Senate. He can, in the famous picture of him is taken around this time. And
for some reason, people love to almost exclusively use that old photo of Calhoun when he's like dying of tuberculosis and old.
Yeah, I mean, it's alarming. It's
embarrassing.
Well, I don't know that it's embarrassing, but
he's like gaunt. And
yeah, it's people. This is what all of this did to him. This was the personal cost of his, his personal life was not a particularly happy one. It was not, it wasn't like calamitous, like who is that president? Franklin Pierce.
Pierce.
Yeah, it wasn't calamitous, but he was
the most alcoholic president in American history.
Yeah, Calhoun was a morose. He had the Scots-Irish tendency to moroseness and depression, and he was not a particularly happy person. And like this was his work, was doing this. But yeah, within a year and a half of 1850, all three of the Great Triumvirate are gone, and they had been such powerful forces that there is, that really, and it's kind of one of their weak points, because these fissures that they were able to continuously, because they were just happening over and over and over again, these regional fissures that they are able to plaster over with these stopgap compromises, essentially through pure raw respect for their integrity alone, they allow at the ground level, these sectional differences have become nearly insurmountable. And when they die, there's not really anybody left. That there's no one who can step in and fill this gap. Now, the characters who are tasked with it are who's the guy that the guy that did the Lincoln? Oh, Stephen Douglas is the Northern Democrat. I think the guy, the character
Breckenridge.
Breckenridge is, he's like sort of Clay's protege, and then the direct successor to John C. Calhoun was the another of, I don't know, it's sort of criminal that he got left out of Profiles in Courage, but the young Calhounite protege was Jefferson Davis, and that's they were strong men in their own ways, but sort of uniquely unable to plaster over all these fissures that had grown that large. And so
So I need to wrap up. We've been
yeah,
going for like, was it like 3
yeah, we're
hours?
almost at 3 now.
It's geez. Um, so just sort of put a bow on this. Are there any other particularly, I guess, enthralling John C. Calhoun speeches?
His
Uh,
speech on the bank bill in 1817 is one of his best. Um, let's
like
see.
people talk about like the Fort Hill address.
The Fort Hill address. His speech at the Memphis Convention is, I mean, there's so many good ones actually.
Yeah,
That whole book, you got the whole book. Like that. So
I
what
mean,
is that?
I do. It's
Well,
Union
who is
and
the
Liberty.
publisher? Who is
It's
the
Liberty
publisher?
Fund.
Oh no, but no, the original publisher. And of course there's the Great Duel. What are the greatest speeches? I'll give you the dates for them.
It's uh
Because it's a famous publisher. He's the guy that he collects all these greatest speeches of. But yeah, number one, I just asked ChatGPT to list a bunch of them. But number one, of course, is this one. This is the famous one. But in 1833, he does a speech on the force bill and nullification, which is the right of a state to. That's his stand on the nullification crisis. He does a speech on the sub-treasury bill, which reverses in 1837, which reverses his previous position on the Bank of the United States. And instead of the Bank of the United States, he comes out in favor of state-owned banks, which was dumb. That was a really dumb one. In 1848, he gives an incredible speech on the Oregon question. That one might be included. Probably a year before that, one of his last real bangers. I mean, he's old at this point. He's already dying at this point. His speech on the Mexican War is another one, a famous one. He gives another in his very last one. Yeah, a lot of these are later. Oh, here we go. The speech. This is the ones that the ones that I was looking for. The ones that I think are really cool are his early speech. I like early Calhoun more than I like later Calhoun. And his
might be the
his
dying of tuberculosis thing.
well, yeah, his ability to speak was leaving rapidly. But April 1816, there was a speech on tariffs where he actually he defends moderate tariffs. So that's the position he's reversing in the force bill.
Right, trying
But
to develop an internal market.
yeah. So I mean, he's like, he's at this point in time, he and Henry Clay are allied against Webster, and they do a lot of really cool Hamiltonian. He does a lot of really cool Hamiltonian stuff. The last really great one is actually my favorite speech by any member of Congress on the floor, and this was in the House of Representatives, and it's his speech on internal improvements. And this is the one where the concept of the sentimental republic, republic of sentiment, because he says what we have faction is the problem that we have. What we have to do is we have to build roads so people in Pennsylvania can get to South Carolina and see the way people live. And yeah, it's
Very
him
flattering.
it's very optimistic. It's a portrait of the artist as a young man. It is one of the greatest, most optimistic speeches by a major American statesman. And I, of course, will come on and talk about any of them with you.
Well, that's perfect. And we're just about hitting the
Yeah.
3 o'clock mark, or I'm sorry, the 3 hour mark. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I believe last time I had you on for whaling.
Yeah,
That
that was a relative weak. There's a relatively weak one to haul me in for. Like you made up for it this time though. You
well,
probably
well,
just got the 3 best hours of content out of me that have ever been gotten from me.
well. I mean that's selling yourself short in a lot of
Yeah,
ways, but I always appreciate you being able to come on, and I don't know. There's something to Calhoun's speech that you're right when you say that there's something lost today where you peel back the layers of one single paragraph worth of context and innuendo um, that you really don't see in many other speeches.
the thing about
Um,
it that amazes me, and I've spent a lot of time with the congressional record, with the congressional record of the
mhm,
Congresses in which even a cocksucker like Thomas Hart Benton, he's hard not to like. And one of this is because there's a sense of seriousness. There's a sense of magnitude in the task that sits before them, and there is that great Anglo sense of play is also there.
mm,
You can also tell they're having fun, and I think that's one of the things that we've sort of lost.
and I think you really articulated exactly what kind of theatricality we experienced back then
Yeah,
in a way that I guess no other speaker could really, yes, articulate.
yeah,
Thank you for coming on. I'd like to thank everyone who's been diligently and astutely listening in on YouTube and Twitter. Um,
how many did we torture?
well, there are 364
362, not bad.
on Twitter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm always surprised by the numbers that the Twitter is able to pull in.
Oh, I don't even know where. I ththought that was the aggregate numbers. Are we
Yeah,
streaming somewhere else?
no, well, yeah, that's the aggregate number.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but tune in next week. I'm having Aaron McIntyre on to review his book. I still actually need to read it, so that's gonna be fun. But thank you, Sandbatch, for coming on, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.
All right.